So
Then
we
you
are
can shoot me a
now
link.
we're recording, and then I'm gonna grab the share link,
Right.
and we're sending it.
Excellent.
Wow. Boop,
Whoop.
whoop.
And
And then
beginning
I'm
of
gonna
recording.
close that window. Um, and okay, I believe we are live. Did you get the link on
Where
your?
did where did you send that?
I
Oh,
sent
okay.
it
I
to
think
the
I just got
general.
it. There we go.
Um,
Okay. Yes, I've got the link.
okay.
Got it open. I'll look at that chat.
Cool. And then I am gonna be looking at, yes, all of these. Okay. So, I don't know if anyone's in here yet. I want at least like
Small
M
handful.
and Greg and yeah, here we go. Cool. Well, I have here with me today, my friend David. He is Uh, David, introduce yourself.
I'm all kinds of things. Hello, I'm David. Old Sigma jargon. Greg knows me. I, I'm a guy. I'm a longtime friend of your regular host. I'm a casual listener of the Wildbow Worm and Word series. But yeah, I'm very excited to be deep diving into this stuff. And I'm excited to figure out who all you people are that I know William talks to on a regular basis. I know Greg. Hey Greg. David's just this guy, you know. That's essentially me. I live in Portland, so I'm pretty outside of the or I don't know. Have y'all talked about where you are physically in the world? I assume everyone who listens to this knows.
Well, we
Uh,
haven't talked about it a lot. I'm fine saying that we live in the state of Idaho. That's broad enough.
we'll keep it as specific as that. Yes, but I'm from Idaho, but not currently there. Um, so yeah, I'm an hour behind y'all. It's only noon for me. Yeah. I'm just this guy, you know. I'm here to talk about worms. I'm really into gravel and decomposition. Um, just the recycling that worms provide. I think it's very important. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
I'm gonna I guess send a text real quick. I'm confused as to why Greg's the only one who joined.
Yeah,
Um,
because Greg likes us the best.
Greg does like us the best. Um,
Yeah, Greg, I fully agree. The compost ratios they're very important, especially within in this story. And I think that's very prevalent in these chapters we're going to cover today in particular. It's
oops.
all about composting.
Well, we saw a dog background for a second. Um,
Mm,
Horrifying.
that's a crime.
Well, you know what? We might as well just start. I don't know what is happening with anybody else. If anybody else is suddenly like not here after 15 minutes ago, but
Yeah, let's post in our general Discord. Be like, yo, we doing this thing.
yeah. Let's do an at. I'm willing to do an at everyone.
Yeah, do it. It's if there was ever a time, it'd be now. Ooh, 2 plus 4 times 5 is here. YouTube just sent the live stream notification like 15 seconds ago. So people are coming. All
Okay,
right.
cool.
Glad to hear it. Thank you, 2 plus 4 times 5.
Yes, the sound tester.
Also, should we just call you 30? Is that easier? 2 plus 4 times 5? That's good math, right?
Well, is it
Or would
22
it be
because
four
it's
times five? It'd be
the
22. You're super right. Damn order of operations.
um cool. Yeah, yeah. So I don't know. It seems we could give it another minute. But I kind
Yeah,
of want to
sure.
start.
Oh
Um
yeah, let's just dive in. People can catch up.
okay, so Taylor realizes she was so wrapped up in wait. Should I just go right into the bat, or should we say anything before the chapters?
Well, I guess we can just reaffirm. We just listened to chapters 2.3 and 2.4, so we're going to be talking about those in particular.
Yes.
Um, this is just after Taylor's big night out. This is
Taylor's big
the
day.
following day. Yeah, Taylor's big day. So this is kind of the return to normalcy after all of that, I think, or
Yeah,
at least
that's
showing the
that's correct.
juxtaposition between the two. Yeah.
Because that was a Sunday night and this is Monday morning. So
Hmm.
Taylor realizes she was so wrapped up in doing stuff online that she forgot to worry about missing class. I think it's funny that she frames it that way in her mind. She might need to spend more time worrying later to make up for not worrying now. Um, Taylor gets to World Studies to find that she already has been pre-pranked by Madison. Orange juice on her usual seat. What a double down on Friday. Madison, the top tier bully. This only irritates Taylor as she heads back to the back of the class.
Oh yeah, and I think just a small thing to note with that is while this is a very innocuous small prank, it does serve the purpose of showing Taylor like, hey, we're always watching, and there really is nowhere safe for you to go. You gotta get up pretty early in the morning to whip out the old orange juice prank.
Yes, clearly. And then cool kid Mr. Gladly shows up. It's not in the text, but I always imagined him wearing a suit that's too big for him, so he looks extra young and out of place as a teacher, like a teen Michael Bluth playing dress up as a lawyer.
Yes, and please carry that with the image of lots of finger guns, and basically an old young man grossly seeking the approval of people. Definitely half his age.
Yeah.
Mr. Gladly's gross.
um, he has the class form groups for the assignment to present about ways that capes have changed the world. Taylor thinks about how group work is miserable for anyone who doesn't have people to group up with. To kill time with groups forming, so she wasn't just standing around. Taylor goes to talk to Mr. Gladly about getting a new textbook. This is a great like awkward interaction between the two. The call me Mr. G and the question, the lie, his awkward trail off about the cost of the textbook, being like, "That'll be $35 though." So
Ooh. Yeah, he definitely does he's very non-committal, I think as a character, but just in that in particular, he's just like, so it's gonna I mean, I'm not saying you need to do it now, but it is
yeah,
but there is a cost associated with this. And absolutely 2 + 4 × 5. Gladly is totally how do you do, fellow kids? It's great. And when she transitions away from call me Mr. G, she's like, sorry, Mr. G. She's like willing to placate to him a little bit, but
yeah,
is so dejected from him.
yeah. I think it's some pretty good characterization in just a few lines, like between the
Hmm.
two of them. I always like little interactions like this where like they their personalities really come out.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah, and it's seemingly throwaway interaction kind of stuff, but yeah, you're right. It does very well to speak to who they both are, especially in relation to each other.
Yeah. Um, as usual, she ends up on the team leftovers with Greg and Sparky. She doesn't know Sparky's real name, but doesn't think anybody else does either. Sparky is apparently a really zoned out drummer. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention. Victoria left a couple comments on the script since Vic's not able to be here. And the first one was: Imagine if textbooks were only $35. Um,
Yeah. Wow, really, it really just shows how unrealistic this story can be.
Yeah, exactly. Um, Vic says Taylor's really generous with calling people crack whores, but Def holds back on calling people potheads about Sparky.
Yeah, which is really funny. And also, what I love about Sparky is we will kind of get into this. He's not a mainstay character exactly, but he's got the perfect tee up to be his own kind of cape. Like, could you imagine the Tales of Sparky? He's got the name for it already. You don't know
Exactly.
his life.
Yeah. And then let's see here. He kind of conserves energy and coasts through life until he gets on a drum set. He'll be asleep for the rest of the chapter, and I don't think we see him again. Just another background character to fill in the world a bit.
Hmm.
Um, I think it's
Everyone
good
needs
to
a
have some of these characters that kind of just there to fill seats, so it doesn't just feel like one of those
cape.
anime where the one character with spiky hair matters, and then every other person has a generic haircut and never talks even a single time. You know, you
Oh
don't
yeah,
you don't want it
absolutely.
to feel like that.
Oh no,
Um,
no, you can't have it feel like that. And it is good to like just add an amount of specificity to these things, even if we're not going to explore the adventures of Sparky, which I'm sure are very thrilling. But it is good just to
because
make
it
it. I mean,
it like makes sense that
especially
she would know names because she's like gone to school
right,
with these people.
exactly, just peripheral people in her life who they exist, but they really serve no major impact for her.
Oh, so Hannah Perkis in the chat says, "I love the art," and the art is done by the person who edits the scripts, who is not able to be in the chat today, but has left some comments to talk about.
Make yeah.
And in the previous chats, it's I think ignorant plebeian, and then we commonly just say first name Vic. So. Um,
But
Anyway,
I agree. The art is
but yeah,
magnificent.
all the art is original, and each one goes to a specific chapter. So this is the 2.3 art, and you see Greg there. Um, so right as we get here, Greg is your classic well-meaning teen dweeb who has no social skills and never knows when to stop talking. He annoys Taylor for a host of reasons, but she tries to be nice and keep things on track with the assignment. Greg is very distractible and didn't do any of the prep work for the assignment, having played a video game based off the anime Legend of the Galactic Heroes instead. Sparky is like having an empty spot on the group, but Greg is like having negative extra half group member.
I
Pam.
think, yeah, yeah, it's very important to note that Greg is absolute comedy gold from my perspective. Everyone knows a Greg, but every moment you have with him in this story, which is pretty limited overall, you're just very inclined to be like, "Oh, Greg, you do go on." Uh,
Yeah.
I'm absolutely in love with Greg, but also I wanted to note how hilarious it is that when he's talking about this game he's playing, it's literally called Space Opera, which to me feels it's funny because he says something like this, but it's like that's a genre, that's not a title. I'm so sorry, but whatever game you're playing is not very well thought out, Greg.
Yeah. Uh, I love the space opera shirt that Victoria made on Greg there.
Oh, absolutely
Well,
brilliant.
Trump, well, Trumopa, or whatever.
Yeah, we love Greg in this household, that's for sure.
Yeah. Let's see here. One of Madison's friends comes into the class late, and Greg excitedly says hi to her with no reaction from the other side. When the late arrival Julia asks if she can be in Madison's group, Mr. G insists she even out the numbers and join Greg's group, to which she audibly says "ew" as she walks over.
Oof, that's devastating. And Greg is just such a naive character. For pretty much his entire personality just is exudes naivete, almost to the point of being like self-deprecating in this moment, where he's like, "Hey, of course I would talk to you," and they're like, "Greg, fuck off! Like we're not having whatever you're selling today."
Yeah. Oh boy.
Poor
Um,
Greg.
as ever, things keep stacking against Taylor. Madison's group moves to work near Julius so she can effectively sit with them. Having this many girls so close by is getting Greg all worked up, and he's even less helpful than usual. When Taylor lets him read her notes, he then foolishly gives them to Julia to look over, and she swipes them for Madison. So, yeah.
Brilliant, Greg.
These things happen. These things happen, Greg. Um, Madison refuses to give back Taylor's homework, but she doesn't even directly address the request. She just says in a condescending voice, "Nobody's talking to you, Taylor." At which point, Taylor knows it's over. She has to start from scratch with the remaining time. Greg spends the class alternately apologizing to Taylor and trying to get the other girls to give the homework back. Ugh.
Yeah, that's just so sad. By the way, Hannah Perkis in the chat, just before we move on, wants to know who you and I are, respectively. I think.
Oh,
I
yeah.
I am David. I am guest man for this particular installment. I have not done this before, but your real host is the other voice. This is William.
Yeah, I am William. That is my name. Yeah. And Victoria had said on the notes when Greg is apologizing to Taylor, "You dropped your crown, King." Um,
So good.
and then let's see here. Taylor doesn't consider going to the teacher to be an option, not even feeling it necessary to elaborate on the idea, saying anyone who considered that an option has clearly never been in high school. And David does have an amazing podcasting voice. That's very true.
Thank you. I will try to polish this instrument and keep it lovely for you.
Yes.
Also, but just to touch on that line in particular, anyone who considered that an option has clearly never been in high school. I felt the very high school drama smarm of that moment. It's just kind of like, okay, dial it back a little bit, Taylor.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. Very smarmy.
Very
Um,
smarmy.
let's see here. So, the next bit is that things continue to get worse as, for some reason, Mr. Gladly picks Greg to do the presentation. Vic says that she thinks that he picked Greg to try and take the spotlight off of Taylor, which, yeah, I mean, fair enough. But Greg does a bad enough job and is flustered enough that he's asked to sit down before he even finishes the presentation. So it's a bit of a lose-lose.
Yeah. I guess to just what Vic said, I didn't really consider that initially, but I think partially to take the spotlight away from Taylor, but also just to give Taylor someone to react to that isn't in direct opposition to her.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean,
Tells
from a
us a little
narrative
bit more about her, yeah.
yeah, from a narrative perspective, it's great.
Now, from Mr. Gladly's perspective, it's the worst fucking idea possible because Mr. Gladly is the king of bad ideas.
Yeah.
If there's a wrong thing to do, Mr. Gladly is certainly doing it.
Yeah. Um. Oh.
Hannah in the chat
Mhm.
says high school is rough for almost everyone. I think in to varying degrees that's true, and I think we're going to touch on that a little bit later, just the differences of experience there.
So Madison doesn't do justice to the list that Taylor had put together, and Taylor knows that she could have presented it better, because she can always do everything better. But Madison didn't really understand what was on the page. She just was like, you know, using stolen work. So,
Classic Madison. Yeah, and this is like I think just along with the interactions with Greg and the way she's talking about him, in addition to Madison, she takes kind of every opportunity to show like, yes, I could have done that better, or if had Coach just put me in, I could have got the winning touchdown, kind of stuff.
exactly.
She
It's real Uncle Rico behavior.
it really is, and she, and I can't blame her for wanting to take those opportunities, but it's very much just trying to other people that society thinks are better than, or are more rewarded than her, I should say.
Yeah, yeah. M says everyone just hates themselves at the same time.
Yeah, that's pretty much high school for you. I think that's the real big one right there.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, sour grapes.
And then let's see here. So Madison's group almost wins because of the quality of Taylor's stolen homework, but another group wins just by listing the most things. And then at this point in the notes, Vic had angrily shouted, "I would have been so pissed at this kind of assignment. What the fuck?" Where the group just wins by listing the most things, and then comments just below that, "Oh, you mentioned that already." Um, but I have to question Mr. Gladley's teaching methods here. Picking quantity over quality in a situation like this is bizarre. He also didn't pay enough attention to the girl who was bullied at the start of this very class period to notice that she had her homework stolen. So like, good job, buddy.
It does make me wonder, like, what the hell Mr. Gladley is like doing during during these classes. Like, presumably he should be watching over the students, kind of getting a lay for the land, checking in on progress, but he just doesn't seem to be doing any of the things a real teacher should do.
Yeah, and it's like an hour and a half class period too. It's not like a standard like 45-minute or whatever class period. It's like
Right.
yeah.
Yeah,
So
it's like a full block period kind of thing.
exactly, exactly. Um High school was filled with self-hatred, says Hannah Perkis, and then M
Hmm.
says that's what I was thinking, which could be to a couple things, but
I think regarding Mr. Gladley, if I were guessing, I was
yes, yes.
like, he's not miles away. He's literally right there. Yeah, and that we'll keep touching on that because it seems to be an unfortunate pattern with Mr. Gladley.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Um let's see here. The homework itself gave a small bit of world building when Taylor thinks about the ideas that had been on her list. She's so mad about what happened that all she can focus on is shutting out her power. She decides to try to nap for the rest of class and is able to doze off due to lack of sleep. After Taylor is startled awake by the bell, Mr. Gladley asks her to stay after class. Um,
No, I
what
don't
does
like
it
that.
say? We hate Mr. Gladley, says M.
Super hate Mr.
Uh,
Gladley.
and
We're
then
glad to hate it.
oh yes. Um, and then let's see here. Gladly tells the prize winners he'll meet them at the vending machine or whatever, and then when they're gone, he haphazardly opens the conversation with, "I'm not stupid, you know," catching Taylor off guard.
And the
Simultaneously,
rest of the audience.
yeah, yeah. It seems like he's accusing her of something. Um,
Hmm.
Simultaneously, he's saying he has an idea of what's going on in his classroom, and yet somehow hasn't figured out who any of Taylor's bullies are. He offers to go to the office with Taylor so she can talk to the principal and vice principal. Taylor has mixed feelings on going in Taylor has mixed feelings going in several directions, both gratified and embarrassed, but really annoyed that she like really needed someone to check on her and talk to her about this. But she thinks that Gladly sucks and doesn't want to be emotionally open with him.
Yeah, that's got to be a bummer for Taylor, especially hating him so bad as she clearly does. Like, yeah, I think shame is probably, like, embarrassment and shame are probably big themes of these moments for her.
Yeah, and Vic says about this general area that I hate this scene because it reminds me so much of similar talks with teachers in high school. I wonder if Wildbow got pulled aside like this a lot for whatever reason. And
Mm.
I do know, as like a bit of background, that Wildbow was bullied, experienced that kind of thing, and that a lot of it stemmed because he is deaf or at least partially deaf, and he like has a
Oh, I didn't
cochlear
know that.
implant and stuff. So, um, as far as I know, a lot of the bullying had to do with like that kind of thing. So, um, Yeah, and a lot of people had said in like some of the comments below this chapter or the below the next chapter, like this bullying is really unrealistic, and he was like, "Well, it comes from my and other people's lived experiences." So
Yeah, yeah, and M is bringing up something interesting in the chat too. I think Taylor makes valid points though, because basically nothing will happen if she reports the bullying. It's a
yeah, no,
common
I
story
agree.
where kids that get bullied and the adults never really do anything. I 100% agree. Yeah, and Hannah brings up like being queer in high school. That's got to be a whole different fucking bag of cats. But um, yeah, it's interesting because Taylor is super justified in how she feels here. I think her and I don't want to seem victim blaming at all here, so forgive me if I stray in the wrong direction. But I think her point of view can be a bit overly binary, just in that it will either go her way or it will be the worst case scenario. And I think there is some room for middle ground, but she's definitely justified in expressing it the way she is here.
M said in the chat, yeah, I was reading those comments too, and I was like, it can get way worse than you think. Like kids off themselves because of the bullying all the time. Yeah, I mean,
Absolutely.
like that's the thing is that the high end of the spectrum is like crazy. So
Absolutely. Yeah. It's one of those things where, like, without appropriate intervention, the alternative can be, yeah, it can be loss of life. It's something that seems really minute on the surface, especially when written in this way. Well, minute isn't the right word, but like people can easily trivialize this kind of thing, and without realizing the alternate consequences are it's death. It's complete loss.
yeah, yeah. All right, I was gonna go. Here I am. When a previous bullying incident is mentioned, Taylor looks down and can't meet Mr. Gladley's eyes. It's reinforced that she's looking down, and then it's kind of like a three beat. She looks down. It's reinforced that she's looking down. Then she looks up at him when she asks, "What would happen?" When he is talking about going to the office.
Mm.
Um, and then 2 plus 4 times 5 says, "Here's a fun scare quotes fact. All of the bullying tactics in Worm are taken from real life, either done to Wildbow or to other people he met." Yeah, yeah. So he had talked about that in the comments. That's sort of what I was referring to. Um, but that's a good point about it. So it is taken from real life.
Hmm.
Um, but let's see here. I think it's a good use of physicality and posture when she looks up, asking him that question to like deliver a mood change and like a tone change for a moment. Taylor's less withdrawn and momentarily reaches back to Mr. Gladley. It's not stated directly, but I got the impression in the previous conversation that Mr. Gladley tried to have after the glue incident that she couldn't even engage with the conversation because it was too emotionally painful for her. So, like, it didn't even go this well.
Yeah, yeah, which is such a bummer here because, like, I don't know, it's really nice to see like Taylor just for a moment reaching out a little bit to try and get anything from the other direction. But yeah, I think she very quickly decides, and rightfully so, that Mr. Gladley ain't fucking doing anything for anybody because again, we hate Mr. Gladley.
Yeah, yeah. And with a note that you had here, bringing up the physicality from later, like this book has
Yeah.
a lot of physicality overall, where like the way that she is looking and like the changes in posture really change the mood.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Hannah Perkis says, "Is Taylor a superhero?" Um, Taylor has been in one fight and wants to be a superhero. Um,
Yeah, I don't want to spoil, but I'll say Taylor is both super and heroic. Whether you could apply the label superhero to her, that's complicated.
no, that's okay that you don't know anything. It's hmm, it's gonna be uh
That's what M said is the simplest way to put it. She has bug powers.
She has bug
So
powers.
if you don't know anything about this world, there are lots of people with powers. Certainly not everybody. What is it, like 1 in 5,000 or something like that?
They said like 1 in
Um,
8,000 for like most America. Like if you just
yeah.
broadly swath it out.
Yeah. And yes, Hannah, her bug powers are pretty gross. That is explored and expounded upon throughout the story. Right where we're at currently, we've only seen minor use of these powers. Lots of it lends to like information gathering and situational awareness. And she has the ability to like directly maneuver these bugs on an individual or group level. Um, yeah, it can get really brutal and be really useful, but on its surface, it's a bug power. If you can do what bugs do.
There was bees. She stung a guy in the eye already. Um,
Yeah, that was pretty brutal.
um, she's already like bit a guy with a bunch of
Poisoned
poison
people, yeah, a lot of
bugs.
venomous
Well, just
bugs.
just on one
She
person because he had
Yeah.
healing powers. But
Mm-hmm.
she is kind of an anti-hero.
Yeah,
I don't know that I would say she fits like the traditional anti-hero archetype, but
agreed. She's no Rorschach or anything, but like, yeah, she
she's like how would you describe her? Well, I don't know.
um
It's hard to.
she's a she's
It's a long
uh,
book.
yeah, yes, it's a very long book. I mean, in many ways beyond just her powers, but she's a very problematic character in some ways, and which can make you think she has a tendency to be more like judicious than would typically be necessary. And it's just part of her like tactical nature, I guess. She'll sometimes make extreme decisions for not so extreme reasons. She only nightmarishly swarmed all the other guys with non-venomous insects. That's better, says Sigma.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
exactly.
exactly that. It's better question mark. Um, I don't know. I imagine there's lots of people like afraid of bugs even in this world. So, or I mean, that's proven to be true throughout the story. But so she could really take advantage of that. I think what we've seen so far is really relying on surprise more than anything.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so let's see here. I'm gonna start up on the chapter again. Gladly explains that they would go to the principal to have a discussion about the past bullying and who Taylor thinks is responsible. Taylor asks a question she knows the answer to. If the bullies were caught, would they get expelled or not? And when Gladly tells her that they would be suspended for several days, Taylor is pretty unimpressed with this idea. I think she's right in saying that whether or not meager punishments are handed out, the bullying will get worse if she were to try to initiate this process with Gladly. He tells her that she has to start somewhere if she wants things to get better, and she quips hard and then leaves the classroom when he doesn't respond.
Yeah, just kind of the ending of this interaction. I mean, we've touched on some of this stuff already, but like the reason Taylor is so anti Gladly in this is just because the options he's presenting to her are way too simplistic on their surface, and to her point, it like starting this process it can only make things worse for her. The where she's at currently is kind of accepting what is essentially, like, she's in a bad spot. She knows she's in a bad spot, but it's nothing to be solved right now, so she just has to do her best to sort of float through and avoid it. Um but
Yeah.
a bigger part of this is like with what Gladly is presenting to her. It really shows just for her, it's got to be all or nothing, and that's a common theme with her. Is if it's not expulsion, then it's pointless. Whereas like I again, I think that might be a little too binary of a view, but given what the authority figures she has have presented to her, that it makes sense she would come to that conclusion. And her experience, I mean, keeping in mind that this has been going on for a year and a half without any like proper intervention, um,
Yeah, well,
it makes total sense.
I also wanted to add in that like I kind of like it's hard to argue with the what she's saying too, because
Hmm.
what she's saying is that if they're suspended, they really will like up the ante again on her. And
Oh, absolutely.
it's like what to maybe get suspended another couple days or something, and it's
Right.
like for various reasons they're less likely to get in trouble even if things come to a head.
Right. And yeah, and I think they talk about it in the Danny chapter a bit. But like it's a school that is understaffed and overworked, and not that that justifies any of the shittiness, but like they're not they're not equipped to properly deal with this and really monitor after Taylor like they've promised they would. And Gladly's proposal puts all of the weight on Taylor to solve her own problem, more or less. When in reality, if he weren't a total fucking idiot, he could have at very least witnessed some of this or gotten a sense for what's going on, and actually, intervened himself rather than saying, "Well, Taylor, if you want to take the initiative to nuke your life, then that would be great."
Yeah,
It's
yeah, exactly.
like it just seems very silly. I don't know. Um,
They
yeah,
just
yeah,
hand her
and
a
it
Davy Crockett and tell her to solve the problem.
right, and it just seems absolutely bonkers to set that expectation on a teenager, um, and like her Taylor's reaction. And by the way, William, feel free to interject whenever. I know I'm kind of just going for it
Oh
here,
no
but
no no! This is good. I did want to point out that
yeah,
M said that yeah, the bullies would have tangible reasons after that. Um,
absolutely, yeah,
but other than that, no no. There's a big block here of notes all at once, so I'll let you.
yeah, yeah. Okay, cool, cool. Um, Yeah, and so Taylor's reaction to the offer, basically, it just kind of shows how like she anticipates the worst out of every scenario. Really, she's kind of always planning for the worst case scenario. So going into talking with Gladly at all, she's basically like, well, look, if your dumb idea doesn't work, it's gonna literally be catastrophe. And she's probably right, but it shows that her mindset is typically in that headspace. Like if it's not going to absolutely work according to plan, then it is going to, then we need to prepare for the worst.
I agree. I
Um,
agree. It carries over to
yeah.
situations that kind of don't necessarily warrant it. But I do think it's a defensive thing that does protect her a lot early on. And like,
Hmm.
when you think about her character later, she gets, like, straight up reckless. So,
Oh,
like, you don't
oh,
have to worry about
absolutely.
her being too timid.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Um, Yeah, and it's just so interesting. Like this whole chapter, I think, is a really good example of Taylor how Taylor sees herself in a larger context. Like she basically illustrates herself to be well beyond like high school politics and caring about what other kids think. But a lot of what she's talking about is in relation to that high school architecture, where like in theory she could have already dejected from school. She could have already bounced, and literally removed herself from that situation. And not that it's that clear cut by any means, but she has recourse, but she sort of positions herself within the architecture of being in high school and how to navigate being in high school and getting through that particular portion of her life.
Hmm.
But it feels like a necessary evil for her, like a means to an end in this case. And a lot of it's just surrounding like about like self-preservation, just wanting to make sure she doesn't collapse before she can get to the part of her life she actually wants to be in.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. M says she's so affected by it despite trying to be above it all. It's very true.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And that's, I think that's something that carries with Taylor through a lot of things where she, it's like, it's this railing against authority, no matter what that means kind of a thing. And and it goes back to her interactions, like talking about Greg doing the presentation, and the way she sort of positions, like, yeah, Greg's a well-meaning kind of smart guy, but also he's a big idiot, and a lot of it
Yeah.
is like, yeah, and like when you put it into perspective of like, there's Taylor, there's the bullies, there's Greg, and there's, like the authority figures, like she sees herself as above, socially above Greg, but below the bullies. So she doesn't think
Hmm.
she's fully hit rock bottom, which is interesting because, I mean, as far as treatment goes, she definitely has. But yeah, I don't know. And yes, we very much love Greg. He's our hero.
Yeah, M
He
says,
should have
God,
been
I
the
love Greg.
protagonist. I would like to see a redo of Worm, but with Greg, just kind of like playing space opera.
Yeah, it's just the same length, but just that.
But just space opera. 20 arcs of space opera. Yes, please. Thank you.
For this 130.
Or yeah, God.
But still
Yeah.
technically shorter than the other 20. Um,
Yeah.
let's see here. Where was I? Where? Did you finish all your
Oh yeah.
cuz I
I
thought
think I think we pretty well covered. Yeah, this last point here we had was kind of just you know, Taylor's experience is to expect the worst at every given moment. But and basically this chapter just lends that theory so much credit, when at every opportunity for someone to make a good decision, they just simply don't. And Gladly is the biggest like purveyor of that. Um, every time he's given an opportunity to like offer Taylor a way out, or even just to make things at all palatable, he kind of just chooses not to. Whether it be like selecting the groups, or who he specifically chose to present their ideas. Like the fact that he didn't know Taylor had her assignment stolen literally right in front of him is just fucking
yeah,
astonishing.
yeah. I mean, it really just it's negative reinforcement because it's reinforcing these defensive ideas that are ultimately like self-destructive to Taylor.
Absolutely, yeah.
And Hannah says, "Is there a main character in the book?" And yes, Taylor, as 2 + 4 × 5 is pointing out now, Taylor is definitely the protagonist of the book. She's the main. Uh, she's like the first person in this book, and then when
Hmm.
other characters are on screen, it's like close second person. So it's not
Right.
in their head, but we understand their moods and
Yeah, their motives and
yeah, their
whatnot.
motives and so forth.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I think which is kind of nice actually. Like I think you do get to spend like a comfortable amount of time in other characters' heads, without really detracting from the main story. But yeah, Taylor, we stick with Taylor for the bulk of it.
I think the balance gets better in the middle because in the middle they have lots of interludes, and then
Yes,
when the story gets really intense, then it goes back to less interludes, and I think that um, it's really good. But I'm sure that the interludes are like really hard to write too because the difference in perspective is very noticeable between Taylor and other characters.
absolutely. And because of that, some chapters can be more or less palatable based on that, I think. Like on my first listen through, I was not that into the interlude chapters.
Are we in an
I
intense part? The opposite of
Nah,
intense.
no. This is we're still pretty well setting the stage for what this story's going to be. So like this is maybe an emotionally tense moment for Taylor in particular. But I don't think as far as the full gravity of the story, no, this is small potatoes.
Yeah.
Less palatable than Taylor, says M. Yeah, shockingly so. Well, maybe it's just because I got really comfortable with Taylor's voice, and I could kind of understand the patterns with her
Victoria's
thinking.
right. We love Taylor here.
Yes, absolutely. Um, yeah. And why is Greg's Greg's a throwaway character, Hannah?
He's only in a couple
He
chapters total. He's fine. He is
Yeah,
popular with
he's
M and Victoria because
and me.
he and David because he tries really hard and it's just like not socially adroit enough. But yeah, cuz he's fun.
He's fun. He's
That's
fun.
right.
He's a little guy.
He's just he's just this guy and he's trying real
Greg's being
hard.
Greg, unapologetically. Yeah, unapologetically Greg. That's what it's all about. He's silly and goofy. Yeah. Well, he's not intentionally silly or goofy. He just is those things.
Yeah. Plus, we love the real life Greg, so we don't want to trash Greg too much. Because the chapter Greg, even though me and real life Greg yell, fucking Greg, sometimes, he's not that bad. He's pretty good.
No, no, he's not that bad. He's a pain in the ass to Taylor, and so it's fun for us because sometimes Taylor needs a bit of irritation or ribbing that is not senseless bullying.
Yeah. Fun little dude, you know? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. IRL Greg is
Sigma
Sigma
jargon.
jargon in the chat. Yeah. Long time friend. Oh man, he's a long time listener, first time caller, or however that phrase goes.
He's the mod in the chat.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Um,
Um,
let's see
cool. Yeah.
here.
Any other big notes on 2.3 before we move into 2.4?
Well, just this last little dealio here.
Yes.
As she steps out of the door, on the other side, she finds her main trio of bullies as well as a half dozen lackeys waiting for her in the hallway. So there's like a full 9 of them.
Yeah. An entire murder of teenagers just waiting outside the door for her.
Exactly. And then picking up moments after we have left off, Taylor's surrounded, being verbally abused by 9 other girls. Most of the insults coming from all sides aren't even attributed to anyone specific unless it's from the main trio. But the chapter opens with Julia insulting Taylor. A little detail to ground the scene with another background character that we missed last chapter. The girls are insulting her in a way we can theoretically, where they can theoretically say that they were talking to each other instead of insulting Taylor, and they won't leave, but they're not really physically like, or they won't let her leave, but they're not like physically holding her back. They're just like she knows they'll close ranks and stuff. So the whole thing is them coming as close to the line as they can, and doing as much as they can while still not pushing things far enough to get into like actual trouble. So I went to like a super small high school instead of the one that you and like Greg and Vic went to, and I had talked to each of you because you don't have any overlapping years between the three of you. Um, and so I wanted to like go over what each of you said about like if you ever experienced anything like this or knew about anything like this. And I mean, it pretty much sounded like no across the board, but I'll let you talk about your answer first.
Yeah. I mean, especially in comparison to the types of things Taylor experiences, like absolutely not. Like any high school, there was definitely like cliques and groups like that, and people who would senselessly antagonize others. But as far as like group violence or harassment, I guess no, I've never experienced anything like that. Like some light bullying, but pretty tame by comparison of what like especially if this is drawn from Wildbow's real life experience. It. I cannot imagine to be in those shoes, but I'm sure there were people around who got a lot worse than I ever did. But I've never noticed something quite so widespread and malicious in my experience, anyway.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, like M saying the same thing, and went to, of course, the same school, since it's the same way as Victoria. So
I didn't know that. Wow.
said it was the most tame place on earth. Yeah, yeah. So yeah, Vic and M both went to the same your same
Oh,
school.
okay. So, all right. Go school mascot, who I won't say, and I also don't feel that. So, but yes, apparently we all have very similar experience in that it was super tame. And
Go school specifics and address.
yeah, yes. Yeah, I mean, especially that part of the world, that part of, I mean, we can just say, we mentioned like I'm from Idaho. Overall a very, very mellow place. Obviously, politically fucking ass backwards, but as far as things of this nature, like I don't know, especially Taylor experiences, like or not directly so much, but there's a lot of like gangs and things like that super present. And while those things
Yeah, like
exist,
those things exist in the like city we're from, but not the part of the city we're from. Um,
yeah, exactly. Okay, cool. I just didn't want to I just didn't want to step on any toes in that direction.
yeah, I figure it's better to just not like say everything all the time. But
Totally fine. Yeah. Does Taylor
does
wear a
Taylor wear a
mask?
mask? When in costume, yes, yes, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
She wears
Yep.
a full face mask that's made from her costume is made from spider silk from Black Widows that she sort of takes care of. And so it's like knife proof and stuff.
Mm-hmm. It's got
In real
mandibles
life,
on it.
spider silk is what people use for defensive clothing, including bulletproof vests. So yeah.
See, I didn't know how much that extended into real life because I'm not
Yeah,
a
no, 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 no.
learned
I
creature.
remember one of the craziest, like, weird papers I wrote as a kid, because I didn't write a lot of papers, was it was about these genetically engineered goats that were engineered to have spider silk come in their milk. So
What
they
the
would
fuck?
be able to harvest spider silk from these goats every single day. And then
Whoa.
they would use it to make arachnoweave vests because they're just straight up better than Kevlar.
That is totally bonkers.
Yes, her mask does indeed cover her full face. She has what do you call them?
She has goggles.
She has goggles with her glasses prescription built into them.
Mm-hmm.
And
Sorry, I
yeah,
just got distracted by goat silk.
yeah,
No,
goat
that does
silk.
not sound very good. But it is also going to be my cape name. So buckle up for that.
And we're a duo. I'm Spider Goat, and you're Goat Silk. Um,
um, yeah, no, Taylor's. I mean, maybe we can talk about this in the character section a bit more, but yeah, Taylor does. I think really, really well with her costume, especially being that it's like all homebrewed.
yeah, I mean
That is.
her costume is honestly top notch to the point where like I don't think it's a big spoiler to say like later on in the series she makes other costumes for other people because they're
Mhm.
like so good at what they do. And she even gets her hands on like better spiders because she has more
Yeah,
resources later.
yeah, it's super cool. And I think she curates a really cool look for herself. Although, and this is no spoiler because they talk about it. Um, Given the nature of her power and how she chose to kind of present herself, she came off as quite villainous. Very very spooky looking.
Yeah,
But I
she's
think
kind of
that's just
haunting.
yeah. That's I think that's just part of a. Oh man, especially later. I won't get into spoilers, but some of the ways she uses her power and like alters her appearance in certain ways, it gets really, really
And like when
spooky.
they talk about her from other people's perspective, sometimes
Mm-hmm.
like she's just because she moves around like weird because she has all the extra sensory, she's just such a creep. Like she holds her
Yeah.
body at weird angles and then like prowls around. I'm using that word
Mm-hmm.
already. I was gonna
Oh
say it
yeah,
later
yeah.
on, but yeah, like Taylor is just like just a really strange person already. And like
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And because of how her power works, like you just see a lot of instances where she's just like spaced out using her power, just surrounded by bugs and stuff like that. And it's just, yeah, from any other character's perspective, it's an absolute nightmare. No one wants to trifle with that.
Yeah, and they really do just think she's a creep and like don't want to talk to
Mm-hmm.
her a lot of the time.
Yeah, creepy crawlies.
But
Um,
let's
yeah,
see
yeah.
here. And then Greg's experience at the same school as all of the other three was that it was just like not really present, and he was pretty like head down in the books at the time,
Hmm.
and in his own words, like untouchable because like he was like graduating a year early and all the AP classes and stuff like that. Like
Hmm.
just
Well,
why would
little
anyone
smart
try and
boy.
bully him?
No, yeah, I think it's not that people admired intelligence really, but when someone's so in their element or in their game, I don't think no one I knew would have gone out of their way to yuck someone's yums, you know?
Right, right, yeah. Um, but let's see here. Blah 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 blah. And then skipping back into the chapter, the range of insults is pretty wide, and as Taylor mentions in her internal monologue, they're not even focusing on which insults they're using, just keeping up the endless stream to keep delivering the feeling behind the words over and over again. I feel like
Yeah.
this chapter does a really good job of making the insults feel relentless, and I know you have some notes about that here too.
Yeah, yeah. I thought like so basically Taylor is surrounded by an entire, like I said, a murder of teenagers.
Yeah, exactly.
And like incessantly hurling these insults, like pointed, not pointed. The content didn't really matter so much. It's more just the consistency. And I don't know, I thought it was an oddly intelligent tactic given what they're trying to accomplish. I wouldn't really think of a horde of teens to be quite so pointed in what they're trying to achieve. But I think I think they do a really good job at just making her feel small and totally useless, even when I don't know they literally back her into a corner. But it's just it's so well done. It was I don't know. It's very sad to empathize with Taylor on this one.
Yeah, I'm gonna actually
And
switch the chapter art right when we get to the moment that the art reflects as
okay,
well.
great. Um, yeah, and another point I wanted to make on that, or I guess a few small things, but this whole interaction does well to keep Taylor like in her in fight or flight mode. It keeps her constantly having to make a drastic decision one way or the other, or at least pushes her into that point. And in this case, we end up seeing it, but um, yeah, she ends up totally ejecting. And obviously we have to note that Madison of the group is the biggest beta fucking baby and just keeps bringing up the juice. Does everyone remember the juice? My greatest work, my masterpiece, the juice. Uh fucking oh yeah, and M M exactly. I feel like it was just vaguely alluded to for while like I kind of forgot about the juice. Yeah, yeah, you almost forget about the juice incident, but then Madison, just in time, brings you right back because who could forget such a popular jab?
I want
Um,
to address the chat for a second. So M had said maybe a couple minutes ago.
mm,
This chapter was bonkers. I feel like it helped to illustrate how bad the bullying actually is. And then
mm-hmm.
Hannah said, "Is this book very popular?" Hard to say. I don't
I have no
know.
idea.
It's like hard for me to like judge that because web fiction seems like such a smaller medium. Greg, can you
It's a pretty
actually
niche
write a
genre,
comment
yeah.
about that? I know you know like way more about that than I do. Like, yeah. Very
Okay.
popular for web fiction. I don't know readership numbers, but Wildbow makes a decent living on donations. Yeah, yeah, he
Okay.
makes about like between $5,000 and $6,000 USD monthly on Patreon. I'm sure there's like some fees or
Oh wow.
something on that, but it's just for writing. But you got to remember too that the amount that he writes, the
Oh,
like
is
current day
immense.
chapters of like Pale and stuff, like I'm assuming they're like ward length chapters. So like with that, you're writing for like 50 or 60 hours every week and you have to keep this constant drumbeat of schedule. Like there's never any breaks. So
Mm-hmm.
um because the chapters now are short, but they get like pretty
They get
good
super
sized.
long.
Like one of the
Yeah.
reasons I only wanted to do two chapters, even though I knew the start of the story would be really slow, is that like I didn't want to set a pace for myself that I totally couldn't keep up with later. So
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, like these are pretty small moments. Like later on in the book, Wildbow, like, I mean, you can drag over a small interaction over like an hour long chapter, you know, like it can really, it can get really, really granular and detailed. But right where we are, we're sort of gliding through the interactions at a pretty quick pace. Um,
Yeah, so I'm gonna try and balance that out as I go. But
totally. Yeah, I mean, there will definitely hit a point where you may spend hours covering a single chapter, just as we'll probably spend plenty of time covering these two.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. One other thing I just kind of wanted to note, just like from a character perspective here, but is for Taylor. She spends. I mean, obviously, she has to deliver this in a way that is appealing to an audience. I mean, from a writer's perspective, but she spends so much time analyzing the confrontation in real time while it's happening, and sort of mapping out her next moves, kind of being like, well, if I do this, here's exactly what's going to happen. Odds are this interaction's going to end up with me on the floor if I get physical, like things like that. Where I was a little bit curious, and we kind of touched on this separately, but if this is just part of Taylor or if this is power influenced. I think it's a little bit of both, but
Yeah, I
you
think
know,
it almost it's
no, yeah, go ahead.
almost just like so totally linked in terms of her power and her personality are very like similar, and like she was this way before, but I think it was reinforced by like
Hmm.
having her power. um
Absolutely, yeah.
it really it really made her like think like, because she, when she talks about like getting her power and then like learning about it, she was very analytical even from the start about like
Hmm.
analyzing her own capabilities and going through all this stuff. And like initially she spent all this time like cataloging all this information, and while she doesn't have the notebook anymore, she still did all that stuff. And like she is so easily able to incorporate new ideas and changes into the way that she acts, the way that her power
Mm.
operates. Like all of that time, I've always glossed over it in my head, but like I'm thinking about it just now. That's probably all stuck with her anyway. So,
Absolutely, and I have two thoughts on that, but one I want to address what M said in the chat is y'all ever hear about intellectualizing your emotions? I haven't heard about it in that phrasing, but I know exactly. I think I know exactly what you're getting at. In just like she, a lot of Taylor's thought processes are either justifying or like or sort of rationalizing what she's feeling, which sometimes rather than just feeling the thing. And yeah, M goes on to say, I feel like she tries to do that to use a different part of her brain to not feel things. Absolutely.
I agree
Uh,
with you, Em.
um,
I think that that's right. That this is a good example of Taylor uh, being able to avoid thinking about it and compartmentalize by focusing on something else specifically. You'll see throughout the book
mhm,
her focusing on like something that like she'll just suddenly switch her focus and pay really close attention to something. We'll
mhm.
even see it at the end of this chapter.
Yeah, yeah, and a lot of that, I mean, maybe not so much in this chapter, but a lot of that is, emphasized more so by her power. But to speak to like her nature as a human being, like when her first notebook got trashed, she made a second one. It made her aware of that, like, oh right, my thoughts and ideas, and this written proof of what I'm experiencing could be released in some way. It could get out to people. So she went out of her way to make a cipher for her own notes. So she writes in code and then that she can quickly and easily understand. But no, very few people, aside from possibly the other person on this stream, William, I know has done this, but very few people in life would go out of their way to completely codify their own language and their own notes just out of a precautionary measure. I think it's something like you could imagine an
It's
adult
like a
doing in one
crazy
of these
person thing to
positions.
do.
It's a little bit of a crazy person thing to do, but mostly it's just like a crazy thing for a teen to have to do. Okay, yeah,
All
the
right,
Unabomber. Good stuff.
sure, I'm
Okay,
the
okay,
Unabomber.
fair enough, fair enough, fair enough. Sure, William's the Unabomber. But yeah, I just think it's an interesting thing to note, like the type of person she is, even beyond the power, even beyond um, kind of how she's being dealt with in the world. She's just already this very very type A analytical human being. Also,
I get it, Em. I'm being roasted.
I'm just saying, I'm just saying,
Taylor's being
it's not
roasted. I'm being roasted. We're all getting a little singed.
going for the throat. Yep.
Yep, yep.
um, sorry, yeah, William. Please keep going.
Oh, right. Where was I? Yeah, okay. Yeah, Taylor's able to, and we'll sort of get to this like breaking point in a minute, but Taylor's able to compartmentalize her feelings up until the breaking point, when Emma like really turns things around on her, and makes her start to cry. And I think that this is a lot to do with built up defenses from having dealt with the bullying for so long. So she has like all these internal like subtle things she does to be able to shrug off the emotional weight of all the things that have happened to her,
Hmm.
like moment to moment and long term, sort of distinct from each other, but
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, I think it's like it's a very it's a learned tactic here to not fight back, because
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
she's been dealing with all this stuff for so long. Like she knows what the probable end result is if she chooses to go any other route. So yeah, like that compartmentalization is super important just for her mental well-being. Like if she didn't and she leaned full in any direction, I think it would leave her too vulnerable from her perspective, not just physically but emotionally as well.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. And like the whole idea that she says nothing so that they don't have any like thing to taunt her with is like so um uh poignant that they've like cowed her to that degree that she won't talk back to
Right.
them.
Won't even engage with them just because she knows it's just going to get thrown right back in her face.
Right.
And it just shows us like how many times she's dealt with a similar scenario to this, which is also just kind of another interesting thing. Like here is what we're seeing to sort of exemplify the things that Taylor's been experiencing over this time. But like you have to imagine this type of interaction, maybe not so grandiose, has happened presumably dozens of times in the past. Like this is a regular type of occurrence for her, and she's often backed in these type of corners.
Right, right,
And
right.
we'll get into it, but there's a big shift in this particular instance that um, I think is kind of a catalyst for what happens next. Like, yeah, it gets interesting. This one's a little bit different, I imagine, than previous occurrences.
Yeah. Um Gladly comes out, and it says that he's only like 3 feet behind where Emma is, and the insult right before he comes out, meaning that he's like within, within hearing distance, assuredly,
Mm-hmm.
is one of the unnamed girls saying, "If I were her, I'd kill myself." And then, like, he has eye contact with Taylor after this is said, and then continues moving on. And then the next comment that he also definitely heard was, "So glad we don't have Jim with her. Can you imagine seeing her in the locker room? Gag me with a spoon." So,
Uh,
like,
ugh, ugh,
yeah.
ugh. And I think this is the moment where collectively we completely give up on any hope of Mr. Gladly not being a total piece of shit. Because he makes basically after this whole spiel of trying to of offering Taylor a hand. This moment kind of shows us like what a half-hearted gesture that was, likely rooted in self-preservation for him.
Yeah, I mean, like
Um,
it's Taylor's gonna say it in a second, but it's like what were you just trying to cover your ass? Like, I mean,
right,
she just mentally
exactly.
thinks that. She doesn't say that out loud, but
But yeah, I mean, and I think we're all just like, oh fuck you, Mister Gladly, like that. Ugh,
because
any
like
plausible deniability he
the
would have
difference
had is
between
gone.
like saying I don't know who did the juice thing and like hearing a girl say to another girl, the if I were her I'd kill myself,
Right.
I don't know how he could possibly justify not stepping in at that point. um because he's right
Oh yeah.
there.
He's literally right there.
It's
And it goes back to like his he wanted Taylor to be the one to identify these people. So anything that happens from that, from it being brought up to the school authorities or whatever, and this is making me think of another thing too, but any repercussions from that would be rooted to Taylor, not to him. But it also goes back to like what I think um the previous interaction after her trigger when she got her power. um it Danny, her father, was like threatening to basically threatening the school staff with like the treatment there, and the cops almost had to get called. And basically I think Mr. Gladly knows that whatever's going on surrounding her could very easily and likely will blow up in his face, and he's just not wanting to deal with that whatsoever. And it's a fucking coward move.
Okay, so going back for a second, and I'll jump back into the doc, but I wanted to address the chat.
Hmm.
So 2 plus 4 times 5 says, I guess Gladly might have been thinking, well, she's just told me in the classroom that she didn't want help, I guess, but still, Jesus Christ. And like, the thing is, I don't think that that is enough of a justification, given that the the separation between going to the principal about like the juice prank, or whatever, where there's like no witnesses, but like he is a direct witness to the bullying in this instance, which is such a
Right.
different level than witnessless crime. And like he needs to intervene in an active bullying
Hmm.
situation. Like a teacher needs to stop that. Like
Hmm.
that's just part
Absolutely.
of your duty as an adult who is supposed to be responsible for, like, you know
For
youths.
young people. Like, yeah, yeah, like, and I think Mr. Gladly could have been justifying to himself in that way. I mean, I think that's likely what he was telling himself in those moments. But yeah, the fact that upon real time witnessing the bullying, he didn't step in, it's totally aberrant behavior. Like that, it blows my mind that he, yeah, I don't know. It's just very crummy of him
Mm-hmm.
on all of fronts.
Yeah.
Um,
And then M had said, is there a possibility that he sees justification in Taylor's reasoning and that's why he doesn't help? I, I don't know about that. And then M says, me being a Gladly apologist. Ah. And then 2 plus 4 times 5, I think, is right with, he could have interrupted the bullies with something like, what's up, fellow kids? Like,
yeah,
even if he's trying
had
to
he
keep
turned
his
his hat
social
back
standing.
around?
Yeah.
Right, totally. He, there would have been a lot of ways for him to at least stop the current situation, even if he didn't want to directly deal with it. You know what I mean? Like, he didn't have to go to the fullest extent here and drag them down to the principal necessarily, although it would have been justified. But yeah, just to pop in with a simple turned around chair sit, being like, "What's up, fellow kids?" That would have been at least something to interrupt the flow enough to give Taylor an out.
Yeah. And I wanted to say about this, that I think that part of this, from my perspective, part of why Gladly is doing this the way he does it is that he is caught up in the high school dynamics by being
Hmm.
like one of the cool kids, even though he's actually an adult. He, if he stands with Taylor on this or just stops the bullying, he will lose his status with the kids for at least a whole
Hmm.
year. And
Oh
like
yeah.
that seems really petty, and I'm not saying that's good. I'm saying that's bad, but it is probably his like underlying actual reasoning that he wouldn't
Right.
admit to himself.
Oh, totally. And again, yeah, like I think Mr. Gladly shows throughout this entire chapter just like self-preservation, or through these last two chapters. But he's while he wants to do his due diligence in saying, "Yeah, I spoke with Taylor and she said she didn't want help." He's not actually that interested in getting caught up in whatever's going on with her. I think it's exactly like you said.
Hmm.
He wants to make sure he's technically doing his job, technically, but not, yeah, not losing standing with these kids who, I doubt this is where his mind's at, but who theoretically could make his life hell as well.
Right, I guess that's true. I didn't even really think about that angle, but you are right. Um, and then you had talked about Taylor's mindset from gladly like giving up and moving on when we were moving through the thing. I think it was
Yeah.
important stuff.
Um Totally, yeah. I mean, I think like this just further reinforces like she can't trust authority. She simply can't. That's not an option. And like seeing, it all this interaction does is fully justify her suspicion and her not wanting to reach out and thinking that she's so much better off as like a solo unit, because it's the only situations where she has full control and doesn't have to rely on anybody, because every time she's even vaguely tried to do that, it's been a nothing burger. Like yeah, I I think we kind of touched on the majority of that, but I think largely this is just like another notch in the belt of like, okay, that, yep, that tracks. Looks like I'll continue to have to go on my own path here.
Right, right. Um, and then they kind of touch on gendered expectations, and I kind of think that it's more like just to do with the social hierarchy of that school, not really
Hmm.
specifically gendered expectations. I do think that if she was like if the situation was all boys, then she could probably get away with the like attack she describes to
Hmm.
like end the situation. But I don't think that what's happening to her, like I think it's so, I don't know. It's so far what's happening to her that even if that she was a boy, they could probably spin it the same way that she's
Right.
describing that Emma would spin it now. So I think she's just mistaking like one thing for another.
I, yeah, I think so too. And I think the way she's talking about it is more, I mean, it's kind of just an immature perspective, I think, from a teenager, but she's like, yeah, boys would fight one way and girls would fight another. And I think like
Well,
I don't
because
I
we'll
don't think
see her
this.
growth on this later when somebody says a
Yeah.
similar thing to her around like arc 11 or 12, says something like pretty
Hmm.
similar, and then she just like totally dismisses it. And she's like, no, it just has to do with our individual like personalities and powers. It really
Yeah,
doesn't have anything to
exactly.
do with our genders. Um,
Totally. So yeah, I mean, maybe this line is thrown in kind of just to exemplify that over
well,
time.
because she does change like a lot.
Yeah,
So,
oh, absolutely. She becomes. I won't call her ever fully woke, but she wakes. She's waking up a little bit over time. Um, just to address M in the chat here, to go back to like the feelings on Gladly's intervention, even her relying on her own dad failed her when it came down to them going through the worst case scenario. Absolutely, he fully did. The only person, or yeah, let me just finish your comment here, but like the fact that he neglected her and needed to be reminded to take care of his own daughter. Exactly that. It's the she has had terrible luck when needing to rely on anyone. And like, first it was like her mom passing away, and then her dad neglecting her and then needing to be reminded of that. And then she also comes to lose contact with the family who took care of her while her dad neglected her. So it's, and then at school she doesn't have teachers she can rely on. It's just like every source of authority and like people who are in a position to help her are constantly letting her down at every opportunity.
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, And then, yeah, we need to get a little further down because I do want to touch back on what you were just saying,
Mhm.
with your further notes, when you talked about the family dynamic of like close friends.
Oh,
Like the
yes.
stuff you were
Yes.
saying was really interesting. So, we won't drop that, but we just will place it where it was sort of
Yeah, yeah.
slotted. So, so we already sort of said Taylor thinks about the social hierarchy, and then once you're at the top of the stack, like Emma, you don't really have to worry about the rules. You can get away with
Mm-hmm.
kind of whatever. So like power begets more power in that case.
Yeah.
And then when there's sort of a break in the conversation with like Madison bringing up the juice one more time, then uh, at that point, finally Emma speaks up and says, she says, "Are you feeling upset?" Wait, what is that?
It's something like, you seem upset, Taylor.
Yeah, it's what's the matter, Taylor? You look upset. And
Yeah.
then right at that point, Taylor thinks to herself that this would have been like the perfect moment to like break their flow. And when she opens her mouth to say something and tries to say a graceless "fuck you," then it doesn't even work because that's when Emma like strikes her in her weak point, says, "So upset you're going to cry yourself to sleep for a straight week." And oh, when did this chapter come out? This chapter's release date is
Roughly a
um
100 years ago.
I believe this is February 4th. No, this is probably, yeah, I think this is
Let's see.
marking that it's February 4th of 2011. The chapter,
Mm-hmm.
it says like 2-04. Maybe
Yeah.
it's April 2nd of 2011, but either way.
Just looking at I'm just looking at parahumans.wordpress, but it looks like this 2.4 is posted on July 16th of 2011.
Oh, okay. So oh, I'm an idiot. I'm a moron. That's two for the
The
arc
chapter
chapter.
dates are, yeah, the chapter dates are up at the top there.
Oh, they probably are. I'm looking at the midpoint where they're uh
Oh, all good, all good.
transitioning. Um so here um
Yeah.
Emma says the line that is the callback to when she was being comforted, like Taylor was being comforted by Emma about her dead mom. Um,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
so I feel like we didn't quite introduce that moment super well. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, yeah. So basically, Emma's line, "So upset you're going to cry yourself to sleep for a straight week." That is like a direct callback to something she said to Emma, and I guess this is where we get the really solid background that Emma and Taylor used to be super super close friends before high school, and Emma was there supporting her when Taylor's mom passed away. It was Emma's mom who had to criticize Danny and address the neglect and all that. And they became really close. And there's a moment where Emma and Taylor I think are at a park, and Emma kind of goes in to say like, I really admire you, Taylor, because of how strong you are through all of this. Like, your mom passed away and you're doing fine. And Taylor kind of talks about it like, well, I might seem fine, but I've been crying myself to sleep for a straight week. Like, so that's a direct callback to this really like open, tender moment that you had just as friends. And Emma lets Taylor cry on her shoulder, and they cry together. And it's like what you would want a friend to be, the way you would want a friend to be there for. And so this hits Taylor so hard because it's showing that juxtaposition. It's pulling the rug out from beneath her.
And in the
And
moment after the flashback, you see Emma's face.
with the yes, there's that art, that beautiful art with that big wide mouthed grin. Emma, it takes so much satisfaction that she was able to get that reaction out of Taylor, in which Taylor totally breaks. But the reason I thought this whole section was really interesting, and we can talk more about the art too here in a sec, but the reason I thought this was so interesting is like, I think, to maybe get in Emma's head a little bit in this moment, you can imagine that when you're kids and you spend a lot of time at a friend's house, like their family in some ways become your family a little bit. So like parents who are constantly, taking care of their kids' friends and things like that. I think this was probably one of those scenarios. And when Taylor's mom died, not only did, Emma start to have to kind of help Taylor through this situation, but she also lost someone too. And when Taylor's family started to fall apart, Emma probably felt like a sense of loss and betrayal as well. And now, like, you know, she's basically no longer able to take any kind of joy from her relationship to Taylor. It's become only, um, you know, it's kind of become only just this like putting up with Taylor while she's sad thing, and not really fully getting the gravity of the situation for her. Um, it shows like, yeah, I don't know. I think there's a lot of context to add to that comment in particular, which makes it so effective. But I think in a small way, this is Emma getting revenge almost for like what Taylor put her through. That's not fair. That's not a good point of view by any means. But
Right,
you know,
right.
I think, but I think that's part of the motivation here. Um, and yeah, and with that admiration line, I think like it showed that they have the capacity to be earnest human beings, that they can actually like one another, or did at a time. But now, because of this perceived betrayal, that she's kind of fully spinning their relationship on its head.
Yeah, yeah, no, I agree. Um, and I we had talked about how there were like really just earnest interactions in the memory. It's not like super long, but it
Hmm.
feels very real, I guess.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Um, and I can kind of keep going just a little bit. Oh, I guess let's address the chat
yeah,
for a moment.
I was gonna say I do want to take a break to say for a moment to Hannah, there is gay stuff in this book.
Yeah, there's a good amount of gay stuff.
Not like a lot in this one. There's more gay stuff in the second book.
Yes.
Um, and
I
then
will. It's been addressed before though, and in this stream, but like, there's definitely some less than queer friendly dialogue or thoughts. So I mean, that's an unfortunate part of some of the characters, and I think in when they re-recorded a lot of the audiobook, they definitely added a note at the top of just being like, if you're looking for trigger warnings throughout this stuff, like you're not going to get them, unfortunately. A lot of the characters do say some crummy things over time, but luckily this is a journey of growth for our hero.
well, I think the upfront
And
warning is more like if you're sensitive to like a lot of things, probably don't read this
mhm,
because it's like
yeah,
it's a very violent story, it's very emotionally intense, and like there's some bad people do some bad things.
absolutely, yeah. Um, but yeah,
And
yeah.
yeah,
I mean,
it's like not for
there
all
is
readers. Like I know people who have had to
right,
stop reading it.
totally, and I can't blame those folks whatsoever. But I think there's so much to be gotten out of the story if you are able to push through some of that stuff. Um,
Yeah, and I
but
mean
yeah,
like
yeah.
honestly like violence in books and like even like the kinds of weird situations presented by powers that are like worse than normal violence, while they
Hmm.
may be like somewhat disturbing in a way, like I they don't deter me from a book per se. Like
Totally,
when I
totally.
read the much more realistic violence in something like Clockwork Orange, like I literally can't read that book. It's just disgusting to me. So, you know, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, and I didn't actually know that 2 plus 4 times 5. Oh, yeah, there used to be a paragraph where Taylor describes a teacher in a casually transphobic way, but Wildbow edited that out in like 2015. So that's kind of good to know, and
That
that
was
is
in the
something
previous episode. That was in 2.2. Yeah.
yes,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah, that's right. It's still in the audiobook.
Hmm.
Yeah, so we addressed that a little bit in the previous chapter. I know that like other trans people would be like, deterred from reading it because of that. So that's why like I'm glad they changed that, but I don't actually think it's like I'm not horrified by it because I've lived a life where I was alive in the 90s. So,
Right.
um
Yeah, if you survive the 90s, you'll be okay. Um, yeah, yeah.
Um, no, the teacher was cis, but Taylor was just being really like problematic and saying
A little
like,
judgy in her description.
yeah. And she
Uh,
used something that at this point is considered a slur, but at the time people pretty openly like self-identified as. I'm just
mm-hmm.
not gonna bother saying it here. I don't want to
Yep.
put people on edge.
You can listen to the audiobook for those chapters if you're curious to know.
So
Oh, you didn't survive that. I'm so sorry. But it's good that you're here in the
M
2020
is
segment.
like a Norn where like M was 2 or 3 when dying and then like has just been like hovering around as a ghost or whatever since then.
Yeah, yeah, and that can be tough. I think we can all agree.
And M keeps saying like nah do.
uh, Hannah, I'm so sorry you weren't alive during the. Well, I'm not that sorry you weren't alive during the '90s. They were fine. Um, you know, you didn't miss much.
Yeah.
Um, unless you're into grunge music, then I guess you missed a lot. But past that, um, yeah, I think let's take a sec if we can to just because it's directly relevant to some of our next comments here, but the art for this chapter, which one is awesome. Vic, this is Vic, right? Doing that
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, kudos Vic for when you're listening to this after the fact because this slaps. I think this is a beautiful rendition. Great character design. Um, but this moment here is we get to see Emma's shit-eating grin after kind of hitting Taylor where it really hurts, and taking the satisfaction from that. And I'll just kind of dive into my thoughts on this. But basically, like the way Emma responds to this situation, to Taylor's reaction, it shows so much dominance regarding the social hierarchy they've created here. Specifically, like she does not need to celebrate this win. This is just like another arrow in the quiver sort of thing for her, and it would be super, I don't know, uncouth. It would be very unsightly for her to like spike the football in front of everybody and be like, "Ah, gotcha." But of course, we have Madison on standby, to be like, "Oh my God, she's crying! You did it!" Um, and yeah, but from Emma, we just get like a very confident, knowing smile, and I think that's so super effective for her.
Yeah, I wanted to address
I
the chat real quick.
Yeah.
So Hannah says Victoria's awesome, and then M says it's so good. Like without context, her stare looks overall friendly, but with context, it's horrifying. I think what sells it
Absolutely.
for me is the eyebrow. I think I can tell she's malicious right there between her eyebrow and like,
That pointy, that right eyebrow or screen left eyebrow.
yeah,
Yeah, it's
yeah.
quirked in such a way. Yeah,
And like the way her smile is, it just seems so like
it's a slight head
her
cock.
eyes don't
Like,
match her mouth.
no, they don't. And
And
I
that's
think
on
like just
purpose, yeah.
yeah, and I think Vic had a really good interpretation of the physicality in the moment. But yeah, it's like this slight head cock. Like it shows a lot of uh like I don't know if I'd call it narcissism, but like an overconfidence here.
Hmm.
But because she feels like checkmate in this moment. Um, yeah, I think it's really good, and yeah, Vic's interpretation is fucking perfect for this. Um, but yeah, and I guess if we want to keep trucking through,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I don't recall who says it. It might, is it Julia or something? But basically, someone calls it out. It's like you have a superpower, Emma, in that she was able to get Taylor to cry, knowing that very specific weak point. While I'm not lending any weight to that statement. I don't think this is like a hidden like, oh, Emma's got powers or anything like that. But it does kind of show like the diversity of the powers in this universe. Like for all we know, Emma could have a power, and
Hmm.
she could be using some kind of emotional manipulation, like the effect people have, whether it's via a power or just like some simple dialogue. I mean, it can be pretty profound, and it shows, that despite having literal superpowers, that you can be like, these characters can be so heavily affected just by interpersonal kind of drama.
Yeah, I was looking at your note here, which I think is really uh good. It's that Emma kind of parallels the way that Tattletale would handle a situation like this, in that
Hmm.
she comes in and she's only using information. She doesn't use any force herself. It's the other girls who are keeping Taylor at bay, and then Sophia with the backpack. But she herself takes no actions, and in terms of like physical space, but she's like
Hmm.
just waiting for the right moment to use information. And she
Hmm.
has that information through like just real world experience and like knowing Taylor. But someone like Tattletale can get that information like through other means with her power.
Right.
So then she can drop that and like do the kind of thing that Emma just did, but to someone she's never met before, or like get through a security system or whatever. So she's the equivalent of Emma's nuclear bomb there.
Absolutely, yeah. And I love, like, how hard this hits Taylor, because I mean, we see this so far in the chapters we've already read, but like, Taylor sees herself as like, if anything, she's like mentally acute. She can play the mental games, and she's already analyzed most situations well before anyone else has. So she knows how to react appropriately. But in this case, like, regardless of any preparation she could have done, regardless of that she's been like in similar situations so many times, this punches her straight in the gut, which is, j- as much as it is like an emotional blow for her, I think it's also probably a big source of just disappointment that she got bested, in what she
Yeah,
would
I
probably
agree. I
consider to
agree.
be
Cuz
like, yeah, like an arena she would normally feel comfortable in. She was just taken right off her feet.
right, and not feel comfortable like be happy, just feel comfortable like in weathering the storm.
Right, exactly. Yeah, yeah.
And then
Yeah.
where we go and oh yeah, this is aren't we talking about the hiding the powers and the divide between the
Um, yeah, yeah. Here, let's see how we kind of phrase this. Uh, uh, yeah, I mean, oh, yeah, I guess, just to touch on that a little bit, during this entire interaction, like, part of her focus is being, and William, I'm not positive this is what you were getting to, but something else to note is, throughout this entire interaction, like, she's suffering kind of a mental beating, and meanwhile having to actively keep her power in check throughout this whole situation. Like, she mentions a few times, like, she can feel her power buzzing at like the edges of her brain.
same within
And
the 2.3 chapter. She really felt
hmm
that.
yeah, yeah, we're kind of constantly reminded that, you know, Taylor, yes, is dealing with the situation at hand, but also having to like actively fight against her power, or at least the want to use that power. So she she's having to fight so many different battles here, in addition to a group of 9 people actively antagonizing
Yeah.
her.
No
In
bug
the chat
chaos
here.
around me, please. Uh,
Yeah, no, no, thank you.
that was
Uh, he's
good,
done
Hannah.
some bug chaos by now. Yeah,
Um,
I think if I were in Taylor's shoes, I would have almost definitely given into the impulse just to slightly fuck with somebody, just as like a small gotcha. But I like Taylor notes here, and throughout, is just like, I don't. She doesn't think she'd be able to really withhold from crossing those lines moving forward. Um, and then, yeah, M goes to say it's wild she thinks she can't control it well enough to not absolutely let loose or do nothing at all. Like, why can't she just let a spider crawl into someone's hair at least once? I think it's, William, feel free to chime in here. I think this is like, it's once you crack that door open, you can't you can't take that back, like just on a personal level, you know.
Yeah, I think we'll see by the end of this arc, she takes like a violent action that is just, it's like pretty, nothing I haven't done, but it's pretty reckless and pretty violent, and
Yes.
she just goes for it, and it kind of marks a moment when she will start doing that kind of thing more consistently, just like
Mm-hmm.
going for it in the moment.
Right,
Um,
right.
and so like it causes a problem because there's a slow escalation and creep. Um, like that's one of the themes I mentioned most weeks is the sort of escalation of conflict, and that is really it's a gateway drug to bug
The
crimes.
bug crimes. It
Exactly,
so is.
exactly.
It
The bug
absolutely
crimes.
is.
Um,
Yeah, once you start bug crimes, you can't stop bug crimes.
exactly.
Um,
Let's see here. You had said Taylor's often comfortable in mental games, seeing as she views herself as one of the more intelligent in any given room. But this shows when she's powerless, even in those instances. Yeah, yeah, I think that's all very true.
yeah, I think that's like the big punctuation mark on this, like the interaction, at least directly there, is just again her being taken out of what would be typically like a comfortable space, and again, not comfortable in the way that it's fun,
Right.
but
Yeah. Yeah.
comfortable in navigable.
And then I said, in some ways, I think this is like a low stakes scenario. Um, is because her physical body is not really in danger in any way, and she's not. If she loses this conflict, her emotions will be damaged, but her body will be fine. So like
Hmm.
this is a good way for the character to kind of get in a fight and lose on screen without having like major consequences, because we'll see as the book goes on, like when Taylor gets injured, it's like bad. It's like
Right.
debilitating to have the injuries she has, even though she's really, really good at pushing through the pain.
Oh
Um,
yeah. And there are some that like stick with her throughout the story. Like there is lasting damage done within this book.
yeah. 2 plus 4 times 5 says one problem with having perfect control of all bugs within a radius of 2.5 city blocks. You have perfect control over all the bugs, so they start responding to your subconscious thoughts like anger. Yeah, yeah. And
Yes,
then M
yes,
Laffer
yes.
says, "Did we see any bugs going out of control when she was entering a fight or flight response fighting Fire Guy?" No, she got more and more attuned with her power.
Mm.
The more dangerous it gets, actually it sharpens her power.
Yeah, I think what you'll see in some later chapters is like the bugs won't necessarily like act right away once she's put in these circumstances, but they are within her control. Essentially like at her fingertips ready to go. Like she's sort of subtly making the connections she needs to do something. But she generally, I won't say always, but she generally is able to like keep herself in control enough not to just let them go, not to instigate an action just yet.
If her mind is really being clouded by something, then it
Mm-hmm.
can cause her to lose focus, but not like her emotions almost ever. It's like if her mind, like she gets, I think it's fair to, it's not like super spoilery to say like she gets poisoned at some point in
Mm-hmm.
terms of like in a fight. She gets hit by a thing that poisons her, and her mind is like really, really affected. And the bugs kind of move without her conscious control at that point because she's so debilitated.
Right,
But
right.
she can't even stand up, so like,
Yeah, yeah. And I think there's lots of instances where like even just lost in thought, she'll find the bugs kind of like automatically kind of doing what she would have them probably do. But just without her directly kind of making the command, you know?
yeah.
Um, all right. Well, shall we keep moving?
Yeah. Can you see where I'm highlighting?
Yep, yep.
Okay, I just wanted to make
Yeah,
sure. Like I had assumed yes, but I just wasn't certain.
yeah, yeah. And I guess I can touch on this one, and we won't waste a lot of time with it, but this is kind of what I was getting at in parts of that. The way Taylor looks at the world and describes things can be, excuse me, a little bit problematic. Because here in the part of the reaction when like Emma said her piece, and we see Taylor reacting to that. That's when Sophia kind of steps in and basically places her foot onto Taylor's backpack just to kind of show like you're pinned here. We're not letting you move. Um, and Taylor, unfortunately, has to describe Sophia as dark skinned to note she is the only black character in this scene, or presumably the only black character in this scene, if it's worth noting in that way. It's not like a big talking point, I guess, but it just kind of shows like Taylor's either saying these kinds of things either out of like a subtle ingrained kind of racism, I guess, or it's trying to demonstrate that she looks at people just as analytically as anything else, and so whatever seems like a notable marker, she might make note of. But it's I'm not gonna say that's a good thing by any means. But yes, so we get to this position with Sophia, who I think like we kind of establish like a pecking order with these bullies, and Sophia is definitely up at the top of that pecking order. She is very much in physically in charge and kind of serves as like the bruiser in these situations. Um, and
Yeah,
it
and while Taylor thinks of Emma as being in charge, if you sort of like monitor what they're doing, Sophia is like also the brains of the operation. Like
mhm,
Emma has like the knowledge of Taylor, and she's like a disciple of Sophia, but she's really like she's kind of just another lackey.
right, totally. And in
It's kind of
relation
pathetic,
to
is all I'm
Taylor,
saying.
it super is, and in relation to Taylor, she seems like, I mean, a relative big bad, But like when you really start thinking about the larger scope of these people, she's really small potatoes. Um, and like this interaction where we start to see Sophia step in. It's also like the tonal shift of this becoming a mental game to a potentially physical one. Basically, she's the first one to say like, okay, enough with the mind games. Like, let's let's try and push this situation somewhere where Taylor has to make the choice. Am I going to keep? Am I going to try and verbally fight back, or am I going to fight back? Again, putting her kind of in that like fight or flight mode.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
For sure. And then where were we? So this is
yeah, we're kind
um
of this area here. Um,
oh yeah, I wanted to mention this part
oh
when
yeah.
the moment when Emma strikes with her like big move, and it moves from like because like Emma and Sophia's comments are actually targeted, and to a certain degree, so is Madison's. But like Emma and
Hmm.
Sophia are successful. Um, like everyone else has sort of the shotgun attack of insults from all the minions. But when things are fizzling out, it's like Madison says the juice line, and then Emma kind of comes in, and I would say like it's like saying, "Hey, idiot, I'm the best bully at Madison," and like really, really one ups her. You know,
Oh yeah.
it's like that perfect like social standing, like the pecking order you were saying.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And like if we're thinking at least just in terms of like Madison, Emma, and Sophia, I based on how this interaction in particular goes, I would put Sophia like at the as the top dog, then Emma, then Madison.
And like
And
Julia
part
next, but like who cares?
right, exactly. Like past that, it's kind of just like fodder. But these folks really show like I'm number one bully, says M. Yeah, like Sophia definitely tries to make it clear, and almost wordlessly. I think in this interaction, she doesn't say anything, does she?
Well, she
She
talks much earlier in the chapter, but she I don't think
yeah,
she says anything when she puts her foot on the backpack or yeah. Um
yeah. it's just such a power move. Like it's just exuding dominance all over the place.
Oh, and she doesn't put her foot on the backpack per se. She grabs the strap with her foot and pulls it away, which makes
Ah,
it so
yes.
that it's not within reach. And like
Right.
obviously Sophia's faster and stronger. Like we talked about this a little bit, and I don't think it's like too big of a spoiler to say, like Sophia is about as strong and fast as Taylor will be when she's actually like physically strongest and fastest, like when she's worked out and is an active cape. So
Yeah.
like she's so outclassed in this moment in just like
Right.
physical terms.
Yeah, and like we I think we know at this point that Sophia's like she does track and she's like an athlete at the school. Like she is the jock bully of these ones.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so I mean I think Taylor being the rational or well in quotes rational person that she is, I think she knows full stop. Like okay, if this becomes physical, I'm getting my I'm getting my ass kicked. Yeah, athletes OP, please nerf. 100%, 100% true. Um, yeah, yeah. I think it's just pretty interesting here, and you know, it's that action from Sophia that basically says like, okay, Taylor, like, what are you gonna do? How's this going to really play out? Kind of hoping for Taylor to probably try and get physical, or to do something that would give the rest of the group an opportunity to turn it physical to justify it at all. Because, like, if you imagine, had Taylor tried to pull her backpack away from Sophia and Sophia did a little pratfall because the loop was around her foot, she could totally make a case that, like, oh, Taylor knocked me to the ground and blah, 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 blah. Not
Or
that
she could
that's
have like released the leverage and made Taylor like run into a locker. Like I think she would have
right.
like more likely embarrassed Taylor in a way that like directly countered her in terms of that, like really pull hard on the backpack, then release and just let her slam herself. Because
Totally. That,
she's like really smart in a fight too. We
mm-hmm,
see later, like
100%.
yeah, because I
Um,
mean, Sophia, she likes to attack her enemies.
Well, yeah, she very much does, and you know, like the pratfall thing, I think would be something you would likely see out of Emma,
Yeah,
not
Emma's
Sophia.
willing to make herself like look
Look like a
low,
victim.
but I don't
Yeah,
think that Sophia would be willing to do that.
I don't think so either. She wouldn't want to ever show the possibility that Taylor could have gotten the best of her, like even in a subtle way like that.
Yeah. Hannah says, "Let's get physical." Is this early in the book? Incredibly early. I would say
Super
that
early in the book.
in terms of like word count. So in terms of chapters, this is like so that's 7, 8, 9, 10,
If you
11.
imagine as a percentage, like we're
So
probably
so
like
this would be
4 or
4% of the
5% into the book.
chapters, but I would say it's like
Yeah.
1 or 2% of the text in. Um,
Yeah, yeah. And I guess just so it's clear, like without being spoilery, these are like the big interactions Taylor's having right now. You know, thematically, this book gets much wider in scope, and the problems become much more grave.
One of the
Um,
reasons the book works is that it doesn't mire itself in any given status quo or setting. Um,
mm-hmm.
it like continually changes and like when something shifts, it permanently alters essentially.
Right,
Um,
right. Yeah, yeah. They don't do very much going back, what do you call it? Whatever. They don't do a lot of rewriting history in this. Aside from when Wildbow literally rewrites history, I guess. Um,
yeah, there is
but
one
yeah,
example of a character being written back as dead instead of not dead, and so I was always
right,
confused by people's comments because it's like in the audiobook he's like alive.
right, yeah, exactly. And you're like, hold on a second, that don't add up. But but yes, suffice to say, like we're so stupidly early into this story that it just please anticipate it changing and becoming what I would wager is so much more interesting and important.
Yeah, but I mean, like, this sets the emotional stakes and calibrates the character, which I think is really important.
Absolutely.
But
Definitely. Definitely.
once you have this groundwork, like, the story is not long for no reason. Like, I would say
Hmm.
that it is pretty dense with meaning in terms of, like, it the chapters don't go very far and they're all kind of one scene early on, but
Hmm.
later on the chapters go
They cover
further.
tons.
They
I
cover
mean,
like
yeah.
tons of ground, more in terms of like total stuff usually happens per word than does back here because they're kind of establishing so much stuff early on.
Yeah, yeah, and just in terms of like how we're analyzing these kinds of chapters, I imagine William, when you're further into the book, like we're spending a lot of time getting into some pretty granular detail about Taylor's mindset and the way these interactions are playing out. But and that's just really because at this stage of the story, like these are the types of things you need to explore to understand Taylor's mindset and why she does what she does later on. And yes, Hannah, you're correct. It is a long read, but uh, if you're like me and don't like long reads, that's why I audiobooked the whole thing. Just because it's great for car rides. If you're going on a road trip, I would highly recommend blasting through some of this and some of these earlier arcs too. You can get through pretty quickly.
The first arc is only like an hour and 40 minutes or something like that. And then the
Yeah,
second one I don't think is much longer.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
But then yeah,
And the
the
way they
later
break them
arcs are
up,
like 10 hours.
yeah, yeah, and
Like
two
16
plus
and
four times
26
five,
respectively. Mm-hmm.
totally. They say it took me 42 days of reading to get through all of Worm, spread across like 6 months. Or 42 days where I read at least one chapter. Yeah, exactly. Like this kind of book can really really take up your time. But I don't know, for me, especially because of how much change there is in the plot itself and with the characters and how many new characters are added, it does a great job at remaining super super intriguing throughout the entire thing.
Yeah, and it reveals the world in a really nice, measured way where you're kind of getting like you're drip fed. You understand a little bit, and then you just get more and more and more, and it's not overwhelming. I don't think. Um,
Hmm.
there's like one or
Absolutely
two
not.
chapters much later on that are like kind of a lot to understand, and like I would suggest reading them multiple times, but like we'll get there when
Yeah.
we get there, and that's so much further. you know
Yeah, yeah, and like I'm the kind of person who definitely, if I like, there will be points in this where if you're not picking up on certain subtle details, it's gonna sort of pollute some of your reading. Like you're not, if you're not fully aware of what's going on, you can find yourself getting kind of confused with some of the later stuff. So I would just encourage anyone, like if you're ever a little bit mixed up on what's going on, like give it another reread and take it slow because it's super worth a full understanding of this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. 2 plus 4 times 5 says it's absolutely worth every minute, and I agree.
Hmm.
I agree.
Full-hearted agree, yeah.
And then yeah, road trips are perfect to listen to this on. Cause just you, I don't know, the story just really moves. Like we only listened
Hmm.
to 24 minutes today, but like the rest of this arc is like not that much longer, and a lot of cool stuff happens.
Totally, totally.
I feel like I've dedicated outrageous amounts of time on weirder things, so I'm open to it. Hell yeah. Hell yeah. I mean, I read Homestuck. You
Right.
know,
I
wouldn't necessarily
almost finished
advise
them.
it, but
Yeah. Yep.
I
Yep.
mean, yeah.
Yeah. But this, yes, please dedicate all the outrageous amounts of time to it, and hopefully dedicate even more outrageous amounts of time to the sequel book. It's very, very, very good. I just finished it a week or two ago. Um,
It's funny that you say that.
well, yeah, exactly. It's taken me, well,
Well,
it's
no,
taken
no,
me that long.
the oh god, yeah, Homestuck is long because like
Oh,
Homestuck is much shorter than Worm.
yep. I think the way you digest each though can
Very, yeah, for sure.
yeah, yeah, cuz like Homestuck took a lot more like direct effort for me to engage with, whereas something like Worm, and I love audiobooks and podcasts
Oh
anyway,
my
so I
god.
oh, I get
Perfect
it. It's
comment.
called Worms because Taylor controls bugs. Oh.
That's
Stop.
hilarious to me.
It finally makes sense to me. I was wondering this entire time. I didn't catch it
Is
through the
that
whole
why
book,
it's
but
called
yeah, that
Worm?
I'm pretty sure that's why it's called Worm.
Um,
There's a lot of reasons for
Hannah,
that name.
I'm gonna be honest. I don't think that that's the main reason it's called Worm.
Um, yeah, yeah. It sounds like you're kind of coming in a little bit blind, Hannah. You'll the first. I think you start to understand the meaning after like the first two arcs pretty
Do
well.
you?
Um,
I
I
feel
think you
like
get
I don't
a decent
understand the.
sense.
I feel like you don't understand the actual meaning behind it until like most of the story is over.
Yeah, yeah. I guess that's true. That's true.
But this
But you
is the
start to
first of many
there.
reasons it's called Worm. You're very correct. So you're right, Hannah,
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
because she can
Um,
control worms.
it's true. It's true. I don't. She doesn't often do that, but
She like
she
never
can.
talks about it.
Yeah, which is probably for the best. I think people would start reading too much into the worms part.
Mm.
Um,
I also don't think they'd be very useful.
Also that, yeah. Unless she needs to like hide a body, she could just get to all the decomposition bugs.
Yeah,
Um,
I would exclusively control worms, says M. It's weird because worms aren't arthropods. Yeah, well, doesn't she have sort of a wider ranging thing? Like where it's mostly to do with simple enough brains within high enough size categories so they're not like below her range. I'm
hmm.
pretty sure like cuz she can control crabs and krill.
Right, yeah, because I was gonna say like I don't think I'm not gonna pretend to know shit about bugs, but like I think like you said it's about simplicity of the brain more so than anything. Like I would think because yeah, she can deal with like some basic crustaceans. It wouldn't shock me if she could also control shit like goldfish or something. Like I don't know. Oh yeah, she can control crabs. They're just not usually like readily available.
Yeah, she can totally use crabs though.
Mm-hmm.
Um
Yeah.
can
Can
she
she
do
do
rodents?
rodents?
No.
No,
Although
no.
we see an alternate version of things at one point. We see through a situation that there would be a version of her power where she could control rodents.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I'm honestly I'm thankful she can't control rodents because that would really color this story in a gross way for me.
She could get rid of
Um,
someone's crabs.
she.
Legit, that happens in this story.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
Um,
Yeah. She just controls bug-like invertebrates in general, but not microscopic dust mites because those are too small. Um,
mm-hmm.
yeah. Yeah. And yeah. You're laughing at that, but as William said, like
That's real.
it's kind of real. It's
Hannah's just
real.
right. Um,
I think Wildbow needed to get ahead of the joke,
yeah,
so
yeah.
it just made it happen.
I kind of want to get back to where we were, but I
Yeah, let's do
forgot
it.
where we were. I
Um,
think around
I okay.
here.
Yes, exactly. We're pretty much here. So how does it come up? Well, I'll say Hannah, buckle up and listen. It
Well,
would be you'll get there.
mhm.
Um, so yeah, kind of getting back into it a little bit. So at this point, basically, Sophia has sort of put Taylor in this position in which she has to make like a hard decision. How's she going to proceed? And being that she's put in fight or flight mode, in a kind of a no-win situation, she chooses to book it. She gets the heck out of there, pushing through some of the bullies and leaving her backpack. They note she bumps someone with her shoulder hard enough to sort of make them stumble. So she's clearly like in a rush. She's not casually sauntering out of here. Um, and one thing I wanted to talk about with that moment is basically she leaves this group. She goes down the stairs. She exits the school, and she makes a note that like presumably everyone's currently watching this happen, is watching her leave and taking all the satisfaction from it. I didn't want to lean too hard into this because Oh, thank you, Samantha. That's my wife. She's got all the biology knowledge, so she can speak to some of that. Um, but yeah, I think with Taylor sort of leaving in this moment, um, and really thinking about how everyone's perceiving her, it shows like a little bit of the classic, sociological spotlight effect, where essentially she assumes, and I don't know if she's fully assuming this, but she kind of hints that everyone is, eyes are on her, that what's going on with her and in this moment is kind of the most important thing going on right now, and she's overly conscious of that gaze. Though I will say she does sort of make a note to shrug it off, like while everyone's probably watching. Um, they're, fuck it, I'm leaving anyway, kind of thing. Um,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
but yeah, it just kind of goes to show like how her perspective can warp aspects of this story, which is a pretty common theme.
Yeah, like that's something a lot of people don't pick up on in their first read through, like, because Taylor really does rationalize everything, and so it's really
Everything.
easy to get swept up in her mindset, especially like a lot of people read the story fast. When I listened to the audiobook, I was listening on regular speed, so all 175
Hmm.
hours, and I
Yep.
listened to it in I think in essentially like a month. And like for the last 2 weeks of it, I was having like worm dreams every night and stuff, which was not great because some of the imagery in the book, like a lot of it was like, you know, it mannequin,
Yep. Oh God.
you know,
Yeah, that'll
just
be a fun one to get into.
your stuff, but your regular worm dreams.
Yep.
But not all bad, just some winners there.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
just like took up so much of my time, and I went through it so fast that you get wrapped up in Taylor's perspective, and it's really easy to just be
Hmm.
like, yeah, yeah, you had to do that.
Right. Yeah, you can find yourself just blindly agreeing with her choices throughout this story. And I totally did that on the first read through. I was a lot less critical of her character than probably I should have been. But yeah, like it so just keep that in mind, I guess, just with future reading and as you move through these chapters, is like take some of what Taylor says with a grain of salt, absolutely, because this is her take on the events taking place, not the inherent reality.
And then 2 + 4 × 5 says I finished Worm in October, and I have multiple worm themed dreams a week. Yeah, no, I mean I still dream of Worm, but these were like intense, and it was like every single night, and it was like all that was running through my brain. And then I kind of detoxed, and then like I mean I was still listening to chapters and stuff. I say kind of detox. I didn't listen all the time
That
anymore.
does not sound like detoxing
And
at all.
then I picked up We've Got Worm, and I listened to it, and I think 8 or 9 of the arcs were out for it. It must have been 9 because I remember seeing the
Mm,
Weld picture, and he's on the ninth arc. And then so I listened to that, and I kept listening to that as it was coming out. And then it was through them that I realized that Ward was going to be a thing, and I started reading Ward from the first chapter, and I kept up with We've Got Ward and read the book all through.
mm,
And like it can become so intense in some of the later parts of, like, especially in Ward, where like just
yeah.
waiting for the chapters and not having any recourse to read ahead, like it can be really like intense and take up a lot of mind space, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's get a question from my wife.
Hmm, hmm.
Because she's so overly rational, would you say that it also hinders some of her actions as a superpower possessing human? Um,
I would say it fuels her actions. Um,
yeah, yeah,
like she's
and we
able
kind of
to
touched on
use
this.
that to justify her actions very easily.
Right. And it goes back to what you mentioned before, but it's just like a lot of in this throughout the story, a lot of the powers people have are kind of directly correlated with their personalities or at least their
Hmm.
thought processes. And so for someone like Taylor, who is overly rational, the control of bugs kind of feeds into that by giving her so much like raw data to work with. Um,
Right, and the
so
more she
yeah.
lines herself up with what you're describing, like her overly rational, with her like compartmentalized areas in her mind, like all that stuff, it actually like increases how her power operates if she leans into the
Hmm.
skid and like is in some ways her worst self. Um, so like she is encouraged by being strengthened by the power to act out the mindset that she had when she first got the power.
Right, right. Um, and yes, 2 + 4 × 5 agrees. I'd say it certainly affects her actions. Yes, it does play a big part in how she maneuvers. But no, I don't think hindering exactly.
Yeah. And then we've got here. Just gonna jump back into the thing.
Yeah.
So Taylor is conscious of the idea that she can't break her own rules. She's like worried about that. You know, we had talked about this before. If she
Mm,
breaks her own rule once, like what's to stop her from doing it again or like going further? And you know, she'll find ways to break her own rules.
very much so. And she'll justify it every time.
But in this case, eyes on the prize, gonna be a superhero.
Yes. Yeah, because that's something to consider this throughout this entire thing is like her end goal is to be a superhero, is to go be a do-gooder. And so while we want to say so badly like, yeah, Taylor, fuck them up with your bugs, put some worms in their soup or whatever, I don't know, something. But uh uh it would all it would do is if she were caught doing any of that, and I think that's only part of it, the being caught bit, but if she were to cross that line in any way, all it would do is position her as someone with villainous tendencies, like to antagonize people who are clearly not as well positioned to deal with it. Because as far as we're aware, none of these characters have powers. So it'd be the big preying on the small. Although it seems like quite the opposite here. Um, and then yeah, Hannah in the chat asks, "What are her rules?" As 2 + 4 × 5 says, not to use powers on bullies. At least that's one of the major ones. Yeah, I mean, she has like a weird code of conduct. Primarily, it revolves around protecting her identity and not crossing like those. Yeah, yeah, and as Sam says, like use her powers for good. Yeah, she wants to be a hero. So all of her codes are more to say like, no, we're not going to cross those lines. We're not going to fall into villainy, and we're not going to do anything to, uh, combine her two lives. And that's
I
another
would
line I think she
say,
says.
yeah, we can talk about the combining the two lives in a second, but I wanted to mention to Sam's use her powers for good, like her morality at the start of the story is like very like gold or silver. Well, you know, I'll say it's more Silver Age. It's like Silver Age comics. Like she thinks she can go out and stop a crime and like you know just unambiguously do good, and there's just like unambiguously good and bad like
Right.
things to happen or to stop or whatever, which
Yeah, like a very black and white view.
like obviously isn't true, and she learns is not true very early on, but like her morality at the start of the story is very naive. It's like,
Yeah, super, super naive. Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, anyway, but
Yeah.
uh you were saying the dividing line between her two lives, which yeah, agreed, is a very
Oh,
important thing to
yeah.
discuss.
Yeah, she says something like, "What's the point of escapism if the thing you're escaping to is muddled with?" I don't remember the exact phrasing. I'll pull up the quote here. Um, yeah, okay. So she says, "Perhaps most important," I rationalized, "was keeping the two worlds separate. What use was escapism if the world I was escaping to was muddled with the people and things I was trying to avoid?" So that's part of her code there. It's mostly a self-preservation move at this point, but it you know secret identities are a huge theme throughout this whole thing, and she just does not want to. She doesn't want to combine those two realities just yet.
Once your civilian identity is public, if it ever happens, it's it's done. Like there's no going back.
Hmm. Absolutely.
Like
And
it's
yeah.
public, it's
Oh, go
public.
ahead. Yeah, totally. And we'll see some characters later on the line who like don't have secret identities, who just are super. Well, we've already met some.
Yeah, because we saw the article on Parahumans Online where Rachel Lint is the publicly known identity of supervillain Hellhound.
Right, exactly. And so yeah, like it. And luckily for well, I don't know. Luckily is a complicated word, but luckily for Rachel, she's not trying to live in normal society exactly. Like she's already trying to do her own thing, which so it's kind of self-serving for her. But in Taylor's case, where she needs to continue to navigate having a family and going to school and having people in her life who know her as Taylor, that can get really complicated and slippery.
Greg
Um,
says to me saying Hellhound, bitch please.
Bitch, please.
Um, yeah.
um, yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
actually, Hannah might not know this. So there's a character who is self-styled the name Bitch, and the heroes and the media call her Hellhound because
hmm
they want to say it on the news.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Um, and yeah, just to address 2+4 times 5's comments, in terms of D&D alignment, I think Taylor is probably chaotic good, which I think is, yeah, pretty. I'd agree with that. She wants to do the good thing, but is kind of willing to do whatever it takes to do the good thing. And keep in mind, that's her perception of the good thing.
And this is mostly because of her distrust of authority. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, totally. Also, Sam says, also, I argue it's more adolescent to impose that her role will result in good. Yeah, totally. I mean, I think her intention is to go do good. And at this juncture in the story, we've seen one small success of that, of just being able to kind of awkwardly go out and kind of commit violence for good ends, right? Like the fight with Lung.
That's a great
Um,
headline.
yeah, yeah. It'd be easy. It'd be awkward to have a headline say, "Bitch robs store to in hospital." Yeah, I don't think that would be very news friendly. Although probably the most satisfying headline anyone would ever read.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, yeah, and I think just real quick, if we can kind of close the book on the chapter itself.
Yes.
I think, without being spoilery here, in many ways, this interaction for Taylor is like a lot of feelings she has about school and that version of her life kind of coming to a head. In some ways, you could call this like a last straw for her with that type of dynamic, and I think from here, her normal life starts to change quite a bit.
Right, right. This is. I don't think it's too big of a spoiler to say she does not keep going to school regularly because she decides
School's for
to,
chumps.
yes, essentially informally quit school.
Yeah, yeah. She'll make an appearance here and there, but yeah, she's trying to sort of keep up a facade for some time until eventually it just stops serving her to do so.
She becomes a full truant. I get it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I had to
We've all
petition
been
for
there.
credit almost every single year I was in school. So,
Yeah, because fuck school.
yeah, exactly.
Um, to oversimplify, of course.
Yeah.
Um, let's see. I think. Oh yeah. So we covered her breaking her own rules. We covered Eye on the Prize. Her kind of analysis and things like that. Um, oh yeah, and then I guess just kind of final bit. Taylor is four, no, 15, 16 at this point in the story.
Yeah, she's 15.
Okay. Yeah, so she's like early high school at this point. This is her first. Is this her first year of high school? High school?
No, they're in one of those 4-year systems with middle
Oh, right. So
schools.
she'd be in sophomore year.
Yeah, so this is her she's in her second of 4 high school years, and
Yeah.
she's been like bullied for 1.5 calendar years.
Right. So through her entire high school experience, essentially, has been defined by this bullying. Um, up until this point, yeah. But yeah, so if we kind of let's get back to this last kind of comment we wanted to
Hmm.
touch on for the chapter. So basically like she's in this interaction. She decides to flee, and she's analyzing this whole situation, sort of justifying everything that just went down. And once she's done that, once she's compartmentalized everything that just occurred, she it all kind of falls, like the situation itself sort of falls to the wayside. Like she doesn't spend a lot of time ruminating on that conversation. Basically, once she's out, she's kind of made peace that are kind of school and normal life is bad, and it is what it is. And then basically immediately eyes forward looks towards Cape stuff. And once she's kind of done that, she makes a bit of peace and is just like, yeah, what am I doing today? No, yeah, I'm out of school now. What are we doing today? How are we killing some time?
Yeah, I'm gonna
Um,
read the last paragraph here because it's so
yeah, please
short.
do.
Before the thought of going back to school had even crossed my mind, I found myself wondering what I was going to do to fill my afternoon. She just like all that bad stuff happens, and then she just puts it in a box and moves on.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Which is, I don't know, it's interesting because like obviously this is all stuff that's been plaguing her for a long time, but she very much is like a matter of fact person. Is what it is, Move on. Time to figure out what's next.
Right, right, yeah. Um, I
Woo.
think I want to move into the post chapter sections.
Yeah, let's do it.
Um, she's like, "Damn, I have so much free time now." Exactly, Em. Exactly.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Um, but the themes. I want to. We can touch on bullying overall because it's so pervasive, but I wanted to go right to
hmm
your suggestion, which I agree with. Hierarchy. That's great.
Yeah, yeah. I thought hierarchy. This was a great one to see hierarchy in a couple different sort of factions. One hierarchy between like her and the teachers, people of authority. One in terms of the bullying group, sort of establishing that pecking order. And again, when Taylor is sort of comparing herself to the bullies as well as other classmates like Greg and fucking Sparky, she she takes a lot of time analyzing who fits where, and the way the chapter's kind of written sort of draws the reader into doing something very similar. So yeah, I mean, I think where we end up landing with all that is like teachers and bullies are sort of at the same upper echelon, like they're both trash people, but they're at the top of the food chain. And then we see Taylor, who is just beneath the bullies only by social standards. In her own head, she's well beyond any of these people. And then below her, we get someone like Greg, who is a well-meaning but dopish smart kid. And then
I feel
folks
like
who are
she
sort of
doesn't have a particularly negative view of Sparky.
no,
It's a
no,
weird
but he's kind of
view
like a
and
throwaway
whatever,
person, a
but
little bit.
she doesn't think much of him or whatever. But she
Right.
doesn't actually think. It's like weirdly neutral compared to how she obviously dislikes Greg.
I think the reason for that, I mean, this is a really simplified version of it, but I think the reason for that is because Sparky's whole way of life is to not impose on anybody. He's just got his head down. He's waiting it out until he can go do his drumming. Whereas Greg, while trying to be nice, is up in your grill and not shutting the hell up and like being a distraction and actively being an annoyance.
Right, right,
So
yeah.
I think she much prefers someone who is out of her way entirely than someone who's trying to help her but being bad at it.
Well, I actually talked about this with something I had written for 2.2 that I don't know if I actually
Mm,
said on my 2.2 chapter. The way that she views Gladly and uh, Mrs. Knott kind of lines up
mm,
with this, where Mrs. Knott she likes a lot better because she's hands off. It's kind of like the Sparky. She likes Sparky a lot better
totally.
because he's not really present. But someone who's trying to help but bad at it, like when Gladly does reach out,
Right.
she can't even stand that, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, like you kind of almost get, and I don't want to put words in her mouth necessarily, but you kind of get like a sense of disgust from her. Like, and this is where you like I start to get a little irritated with Taylor because I get the sense that she thinks she's better than a lot of people.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's a little bit of a bummer because like we want to be on her side so badly, but you can kind of tell early on she has a pattern of, I don't know, having ill opinions or lightly mistreating people. Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
I mean, we'll see when we see like much later flashbacks to her as like 13 or 14 or whatever before high school. Like
Yeah,
she just seemed totally different. She wasn't really like what you were
absolutely.
describing just then.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, fully, completely. And yeah, and a lot of that is probably in light of this last year and a half for her. And yeah, like you say, she only likes people when they're basically not there. Yeah, I mean, people who are an inconvenience to her, it it she would much prefer someone just not be present than be an inconvenience.
Yeah, and it's like I said during last stream to Sky, like right now in her life, she pretty much just hates everyone. She doesn't like
Totally.
anyone. She wants friends, but she doesn't like want any of the people who would reach out to her like Greg. Um so it's like her mood and mind state is so like muddled.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Same. Please leave me alone, says Taya. Yeah, and it can often be easier in those situations. Like I don't know, it Taylor is both conflict, like she heads towards conflict, but simultaneously is really averse to it. And she doesn't want to.
Well, I think
She
the
doesn't
turning
want to.
point of the start of the story is the change from her being conflict averse to heading toward conflict. I think that's like
Yeah,
the impel of the whole, or I don't know if that's the right word. The thing behind the whole thing.
like the catalyst there. Like
Yeah,
yeah,
is that
yeah,
change
the
in her?
impetus, the impetus. Yeah. Um, yeah, it's very interesting to kind of see that play out. Um, yeah, M says there's no threat of disappointment if there's no one to disappoint. I mean,
Yeah,
that's yeah, that's essentially the heart of it, though. She gets to be the master of her own destiny, and she doesn't have to consider the thoughts and feelings of other people.
which is
And she
also
gets to.
exactly like what when you see from Arms Master's perspective, that's the way he views his own life. Is
Oh,
like I'm cut off
absolutely.
from these people. I don't have to worry about what other people are thinking. Like he literally thinks
Yeah.
the thing that we're critiquing Taylor for as a positive about himself.
Right, right, exactly that. Yeah, because I could see that in one light being taken as like, ah, this is freeing. I can, yeah, like I'm untethered.
But I mean, as we
But
see over time, it's just very sad. Like it's
it's
not.
super sad. It leads to a lonely, like hard life. Um, yeah, yeah, it's interesting. But yeah, so I mean, I guess just all this to say, like, hierarchy plays a major part in the way Taylor views the world. And so I just think that's going to be interesting to continue to sort of explore, and especially regarding our next theme here, which is like the suspicion of authority, which obviously is pretty apparent in this chapter, and is a major trait for her. We already kind of talked about it, but like all of the people in power who have sought to help her over time have been nothing but letdowns, or at least half measures that just aren't getting the job done. So I think there's oftentimes situations where, again, if she were to be given full reign over her destiny, she could she could just simply gloss over so many of the problems she encounters.
Yeah, for sure. I wanted to do the pessimism and signs of
Mm-hmm.
trauma, then probably jump past themes.
Yeah. 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 Do you want me to talk on the
Yeah,
rest of
yeah.
the
Like
themes?
I had thought all year because these, aside from bullying, which like is just the whole of it, which was why I didn't even know what to say on bullying because it's just like the chapters. Um,
Yeah, yeah, and I guess we can give obviously bullying is a major part here, and the reason I think it's an important theme to explore is just it shows how Taylor deals when being the underdog or being subjected to other people's bullshit.
right, right.
But and that heavily influences, like, all of these themes kind of heavily influence one another, but that leads into a huge sign of pessimism, and we touched on it briefly, but essentially any given scenario for this character, she's assuming the worst out of it, right? Like she assumes whatever bad thing that can happen will happen. And that is like, that can be a sign of and this character in particular is dealt with, but that can be like a sign of PTSD or trauma in someone's life, like assuming the absolute worst scenario, because frankly they've already been dealt worst case scenarios through their entire life. And so assuming that is a way of protecting herself. I think it's a way to make her still feel in control, and like she has any say or power in these situations.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But it leads to an overall super negative view of the people and sort of actions around her.
Right, right. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
agree. It's good to mention that that's like signs of trauma. Like, I don't want to go too far into trying to use actual medical terms, but I've
Yeah.
heard a
Yeah.
lot of
Please keep
people.
in mind, I'm not an expert on
Yeah,
anything.
yeah. I've heard a lot of people say, and like, I think this is true at least in like the colloquial sense, that like Taylor has some like actual like PTSD there or whatever.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but like again, I will feel like a dunce when somebody's like, "Well, this isn't actually like." I'm sure that I'm wrong
Right.
in
Yeah.
some way, but
If you're a psychologist or something like that, feel free to tell us we're dumb. But that's
it's just like there's
that's
clear
the
signs that
impression
her
I get.
brain changed after she went through like not only the long-term bullying but also the specific instance that was so bad in January.
Totally. And I mean, I think it's worth noting, like, throughout this whole book, you're going to see a lot of characters who have direct PTSD, who are like living through their traumas and forced to be put in very similar circumstances. I don't want to spoil anything major, but yeah, it's a very common thread throughout this story.
Mm-hmm. So I didn't have any terms for the glossary at all this week, but if anybody wants anything defined, just let us know in the chat. So moving
Yeah.
on to the
Yeah.
characters for now. Um, Mr. Gladly, of course, as we already talked about, Mr. Gladly really fails to live up to my expectations for a teacher. When he walks away from Taylor during an active bullying incident, it's pretty egregious, just leaving her there to deal. Um, I mean, like, if it was 1-on-1, it would still be, you should still step in for the bullying, but it was 9 against 1 students.
Yeah, a pretty clear example of the failings of a teacher. That's pretty horrendous.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Um,
Um,
and if you
oh,
want
I
to say
love
anything
this.
on Gladly,
No, I mean, I think we covered the gambit with Gladly.
yeah, yeah.
I think he's positioned to show like authority figures are dumb and bad, and he's just the prototypical version of that.
Right, right. Um, Character Greg. Oh, Greg.
Oh, Greg, we love
Oh,
Greg. Greg, our
Greg.
boy. Oh,
Very
Greg.
well meaning, but not able to self manage at all. Um,
Uh,
and yeah, we've
yeah,
already talked about
yeah.
how Taylor thinks about Greg as lower than her.
Mm-hmm.
And it
Mm-hmm.
is funny that he literally plays a game called Space Opera and that he, more like Mr. Badly. Hell yeah. Um,
Ayo.
but let's see here. I love that he cuts himself off, but it's very clear to me that he's trying to say that he watches Legend of the Galactic Hero, which Greg and I also watch. And like every time we've just started getting back into it because we like stopped halfway through the series for a couple of years. And
Mm.
every time I watch that series, every single time I'm like, this show is written so smart. I can't even believe it. It's like such like
Well, at least Greg has good taste.
yeah,
Real Greg and fiction Greg.
yeah. They both love Yang Wenli. Um,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah, we've talked plenty about Greg, but
yeah.
Madison.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Uh, yeah, I'll take a swing at this one. Madison is trying to show off to her friends during these two chapters a real "see, guys," hence the juice. I'm cool too, right? Um, if if there ever was one. After already reduxing the juice prank on the desk, Madison gets the homework from Taylor as a gimme just by being there. She steals Taylor's paper and doesn't even present the ideas right. On top of all of this, she's the first one to gleefully call out Taylor for crying. Um, yeah, I mean, I think Madison's whole thing here is just trying to claw up the social ladder. She's using Taylor as a way of getting to her own ends, which is basically, if I shit on this girl hard enough, the other girls are gonna think I'm so cool, or whatever the bad justification is there.
Right,
Uh,
right. And to M's question, no, Vic doesn't like Madison. Vic calls Madison a beta all the time and thinks she's the worst bully. But then in our work chat, where me and Vic and one of our other coworkers are in it, and it's called Emma and Sophia, and then, or maybe it's Sophia and Emma, but either way, those two for real, and then in parentheses, and also Madison. Um, and then right as Vic creates the channel, it says tag yourself. I instantly tag myself as Sophia. And then Vic instantly, while Emma is still open as a chance, automatically puts herself as Madison, self-tagged as Beta.
yeah, Madison is the most beta bully of all the bullies. It's a little comical, but it's, I don't know, it's a real example of what people try to do to up their own standing.
Yeah, it sucks.
It sucks. It's very unfortunate, but yeah, she luckily, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I don't think we see a ton of Madison after this, do we?
We will see her at least one more major time, and then
Mm,
like much later we'll see like a
yeah,
scene where she is like remorseful about this. And
how things went down.
uh, Vic gets to the end of the book and is like, you told me there was a scene where Madison is remorseful, and I was like, well, I mean, there's flashbacks and stuff in the second book. And it's like, we don't get it till the second book.
Yeah, yep, not great.
Yep.
Um, yeah.
Um and
Next up, yeah,
then we got
you take this one.
Sophia. Yeah.
Mhm.
Sophia gets the backpack from Taylor easily. She's not just physically fit, she's got quick reflexes. Her insult was kind of tame, but she did say something that was specific to Taylor, mentioning the art project that Taylor had accidentally destroyed in the class that she skipped. She hasn't had the other shoe drop from that yet either. Um, the way that Sophia like escalates a situation, then just watches and like doesn't do anything more. Vic had pointed out it's very like voyeuristic, because this isn't the only time she does that. We'll like hear about past instances where she kind of does this behavior, but she does it with like the backpack, for instance, or with like the very like singular insult. But she just puts in a little and then just sits back and watches.
Yeah, and we had touched on this in a previous conversation, but like the way these characters, and it kind of leads us into the next character as well, but the way these characters interact with one another, it's very much like pack animals, feeding on prey a little bit in the
Yeah,
way
with
they
all the
interact
background
amongst each
girls,
other.
like they're just so generic. They're not even named, and they're like just sort of following in the like general vicinity of the three main trio.
Yeah, absolutely. And like Sophia's character in particular, like she has nothing to prove to anyone in this scene necessarily. Like she feels, I think, very in control as is, and more wants to provoke the situation to see what will happen. Like, yeah, like you mentioned, it's a very voyeuristic kind of point of view.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then moving on to Emma, we like didn't end up writing a description for Emma. We just put in parentheses prowling. She's like she's like weirdly like she's just waiting for her moment to strike. Much like
Hmm.
Sophia, but she had like so much better information. Um
Yeah,
Having
yeah,
known this really personal like secret about Taylor essentially through the sentence she says. Um
right.
and like, she's just it's just terrible like what she does really. She's like, I'm using your mom's death to make you cry. Like, wow.
Right.
Wow, bud.
It's yeah, I think when we were talking about it, it's just like Emma's mean. She's just not
She's
nice.
so fucking mean.
She's so fucking mean. Well, yeah, like and the flashback scene does really well to show like her and Taylor had a really like a true friendship as far as all things could be considered, you know, like what appeared to be a genuine connection, and now for someone to decide to essentially bury that entirely for the sake of, again, social standing. You know,
You
it
know,
feels like a
sometimes you
move
gotta
to,
bury the hatchet in their back.
right, except very deeply in there. Um, who is the bigger antagonist, Emma or Lung?
Ooh,
Ah,
Emma?
that's complicated. I think in a weird way, yeah. I think as far as Taylor is concerned, for Emma for sure.
Yeah.
And yeah, Emma's impact.
Oh, think about it
Again,
this
not getting
way.
spoilery.
Taylor beats
Mhm.
Long when they first fight. Taylor loses to Emma for like a year and a half straight.
Actually, yeah, that's pretty fucking perfect. Yeah, yeah. I think Emma does a lot more damage to Taylor than Lung could ever do. Um, Yeah, yeah. I think we talked plenty about Emma, but I just think it's, yeah, important to note that she also is not going to be an every chapter type of character, but she does have some significant appearances throughout the rest of the book, or
I feel
books.
like emotional damage is worse than physical damage. Up to a point.
Yes, yes, up to a certain point. Actually, we'll kind of explore that pretty well with
Like the
characters
range of
like,
things that happen to people in this book will show us lines of like all degrees of like, yes, emotion is worse, or oh no, oh no.
I think that concept is really well explored in the sequel book. And I won't give away spoilers, but the protagonist of our sequel book deals with both of these things, emotional and physical damage, in such like dramatic, significant ways. Yeah, it's an interesting concept to explore, but both can be pretty fucking damning.
I've talked about this with like Vic before, but I kind of feel like Worm, the the horror and the danger is like more often it's like physical and like
Hmm.
visceral that way,
Right.
but like in Ward, even though there is a lot of physical danger overall, the
Yeah.
like the stakes feel higher a lot of times because there's like the emotional stakes are like incredible, and like there are more total
Yeah.
like emotion powers in Ward. um
Oh yeah.
and like it just like the story like hurts you with the like emotional like stuff.
Absolutely, it does. And yeah, I think it's exactly as you said. Like, Worm explores the physical world like a ton, and we do get some peeks into like the emotional state of the characters, but it gets pretty rough in Ward. Um, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I think it's really
yeah.
well done though, so I
Uh,
can't wait to be
and
hurt. You're right, yeah.
yeah,
Huh.
that's exactly how it is. Um, yeah, and then we kind of move into
Just the minor characters and the idea of
yeah,
like Julia, the lackeys, and Sparky. Just like depending on how much character texture is needed, they'll add in names or leave a character without a name, or like
right.
sometimes she'll be like, I heard like such and such voice. Like there's one point where she's like talking about a group of four people where there's like two men and two women, and she's like, one of the women said blank, and it's like you couldn't tell which. Like you almost always can. Like this, you must have been pretty fucking
Yeah,
distracted. Like because,
yeah.
and I don't think it. I think it was intentional in the case that I'm talking about, but it's just like
Mm.
a very strange instance because you end up like understanding Taylor's perspective and being like, that's pretty out of fucking place. Yeah.
Yeah, I well, and what I like about the interaction, like during this chapter, as far as some of these minor characters and the lackeys and stuff like that go, is like Wildbow does well to throw out lines, and Taylor acknowledges it in the text, but like Wildbow does well to throw out lines that aren't attributed to anyone in particular, just to show like mob mentality a little bit, like, and
Yeah.
how that
Yeah.
can sort of play out. I thought that was super effective because frankly, like, we don't really care who's saying what in these instances. It's just the fact that it's a constant
Right.
barrage
The
of
ones that
insults.
matter are only really the trio. Like you know.
Yeah, yeah. Those are the people. I mean, we're supposed to care about, not in like an empathy way, but just awareness way.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, yeah.
And then I didn't really have any section for the powers, knowledge, and world building because, like, if
Mm.
you read just these two chapters, you might even like vaguely, like, you'd see words like superhero and be like, what? But like,
Yeah,
there's just not a lot of powers happening. Like, there's almost nothing like that. Um, so I guess
yeah,
I wanted to skip onto this section where I talk to you a little bit about parahumans. What was the first
yeah.
point in the story when you got like really invested?
I will say, I mean, I was like, the fight with Lung hooked me for sure. I think I was like, okay, okay, let's see where this goes.
Yeah, I got
But
you to
I
listen
think
to it
my
like when I was driving you to the airport or whatever.
yeah, yeah, exactly. But as far as like actual investment into the story, I think, and I won't spoil things, but it has a lot to do with the next, probably the next arc where we start getting integrated into Taylor's life, like after this kind of stuff that we're currently seeing.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, for
I
sure.
yeah, and the moment like we start to get to explore some of these peripheral characters, you start finding a lot more personalities that like, regardless of your feelings of Taylor, you can start to agree with other types of people, and you can start to see their perspectives on things and how they interact with her to keep her in check and stuff like that. Um, yeah, I think it's probably this next arc, throughout this arc and into the next one, that really the story starts to set into motion for me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
I'm not gonna
yeah.
have too many questions just because you're gonna be in future times back on.
Yes.
But I'll switch to what do you think is the most interesting drawback to a power? I think that's a
Ooh,
because like one of the
ooh.
things about Wildbow powers is like they're the powers, but a lot of what they are is what they aren't, or like how they operate
Hmm.
and like how you can't
Right.
use them.
You know who I don't want to call this my favorite, but I think it's just such a weird drastic example. Uh I think the character is called um is it Chicken Little?
Oh yeah.
Uh who the kind of their entire being is disgusting and horrendous as a direct result of their power, and it makes them a very literal sticky person to be around. Um
Oh
but I always thought that
wait.
was
Are you? No,
Or
you're
no, no,
thinking of
no. I'm
egg.
not thinking of Chicken Little. Yes, yes.
Yeah,
Thank
you're
you.
thinking of
Not Chicken
egg.
Little.
Yeah, egg
Although I
is
really like Chicken Little too. Um,
egg is like the
but yes,
worst.
egg.
Like that's the worst drawback I can think of is like some of the Case 53 things, but like egg in particular has like a really bad power drawback. I wasn't even
Yeah,
thinking about
and
Case 53s actually.
um, yeah, yeah. That's just one that comes to mind. I mean, we'll get into it more, but like, I don't think, again, not the most interesting, but just as an example, people like Tattletale or something like that, where their power has a pretty direct impact on them. And Taylor's, I think, is very interesting. I won't get too into it just because spoilers and all that, but Taylor's the drawback for her, I think, is really, really interesting just because I think it affects like her relationships with other people more so than it does just herself. Like it affects her standing in the world around her pretty drastically. Um,
Yeah.
there's the obvious character Imp. I think her drawback is probably one of the most profound. Um, but we don't get to see that just yet. But yeah, when we get there, I that to me, I always imagine as such like a hard life to live, where essentially like you are non-existent if your power isn't active.
And
Um,
like they bring something up like as a casual throwaway like much later where they're like, "Yeah, we're worried that if Imp dies that all memory of Imp will go away." And
right,
it's like,
right,
"Ooh."
yeah, like which is just a scary thought on a personal level. Um, 2 + 4 × 5 says one of my favorite power drawbacks in Worm is can create anything but only once. Also
Yeah.
that.
Yeah,
Um,
that's a
That would suck so bad. You can only have a brilliant idea once,
Well,
like,
but
or
that's the thing.
that
I don't know
brilliant
if you
idea.
remember, but that's actually Elite's drawback.
Yeah, yeah. Goddamn Leet.
I
He's
don't think
so
that's
funny.
too much of a spoiler. He's like not.
No, he's not a he's not a big player. He's a player, um, but yeah, yeah. I mean, I think there's lots of interesting ones with our direct folks. I think Imp is probably one of the most impacting to me, just as a character move.
because we like
Um,
him so much too. You know.
we do. But I think like Tinkers as an entire classification have really interesting drawbacks just because so much of their powers are dedicated to like maintenance. Whereas like but from the impression you get through a lot of the different Tinkers is like they're constantly working on their tech. They're always having to repair things, always having to maintain, upgrade, alter it in ways that better suit them. Most of the Tinker powers come with lots of pretty bold drawbacks that are more physical than anything else. Um, yeah, yeah. I think there's lots of interesting ones to explore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then the last one I wanted to ask you this time, although we should talk about this little talking point. The last one I
Yes.
wanted to ask you about this time is, what's your favorite superhero media barring parahumans? And we had talked about this a little bit last night, but
Yeah.
why don't you take the floor?
I'll give you my answer from last night as well as another one that's probably pretty classic. Just because what I'll caveat this by saying is like I can get down with any story as long as it's reasonably well written, or at least interesting enough. And I gravitate towards things with magical realism or superpowers pretty. I won't say exclusively, but like that's a big investment of the stories I like to ingest as things where the world is semi-realistic, but has these more fantastical elements. And Worm and Ward are both great examples of stories that are rooted in an adjacent reality, but really show like the key differences of what an introduction into something like that could mean. Um, I'll say from a more fun level, I really like the Umbrella Academy and Sigma, Greg. I know you and William are not huge on it, I guess, but I thought the delivery of how those powers played out was so fucking beautiful, and that's another series that really explores the drawbacks of powers, and sort of like how limiting a lot of these things are. If you haven't watched that series or read the graphic novel, I would recommend it a ton. It's very stylish. It's a very like hip take on the superhero genre, I think, but it's mostly a bunch of people who like circumstantially have powers but aren't they're not inherently good people or good at using them, or
If
it's
Taylor
not
were
like
there, she'd be saying, "I could use your power better than you" to every other character.
every other character. Absolutely. Yeah, and yeah, Hannah, I'm glad to hear that you like the Umbrella Academy, and you have all three volumes. That's great. And Em says watched like a season, I think, but I really liked it. Yeah, it's written by Mr. My Chemical Romance, which if that tickles your fancy, cool. I'm admittedly not that into the music, but I liked the flair. I don't, as far as genre stuff goes, I really don't like the Tim Burton sort of gothic style. I think that can get really fucking cheesy really quick. And Umbrella Academy does lean into that a hair, but I think it does well with its color palettes and stuff like that to shake it up a bit.
Mm-hmm.
But characters like number 5, where they have the best fucking power you could want, I think it's like a teleportation and a time travel power, but it has pretty severe limitations and has active repercussions in the story and like super fucks up everything they're trying to do, but he's still the most competent person in their group. um I think it's really well explored in that. And then the other answer I would have, and this is like classic media, and just because Alan Watts is a great writer, but I really like Watchmen. Um,
Mm.
it's another instance. I
Or
think the
Alan Moore,
Watchmen,
isn't it?
or excuse me, yeah, not Watts, excuse me, not the philosopher though. Yeah, Alan Moore. Um, But I really like the exploration there because it's another instance where it feels pretty similar to the parahumans world, in that there's a lot of, I don't know, regular folks with kind of powers doing heroic things, and it shows a more like political focused kind of version of all of that, which I think is an important thing to explore. This
Yeah,
worm.
I like Watchmen, but I have paled on it a little bit, and I'll tell you why. It's because the way
Please.
that Alan Moore talks about um Rorschach, and
Mm.
it's not that I'm like Rorschach is the best, he's got the great morality or whatever. It's that Alan Moore writes a character with this incredibly like traumatic backstory where he like actually is directly messed up because of like the
Yes.
physical and emotional abuse he suffered as a child. And when he
Right.
talks about the character, he has such in the times I've seen, he has such disdain for him and such lack of concern. And it's really like
Yeah.
I don't understand how he can write a character who is so much
Who he
in
loathes pretty
like
clearly.
he's so much in the ways that he's trying to demonstrate in the story a victim of society as well as anybody else, and
Right.
then still treat him as if he's this like disgusting thing and so forth. And it's like
Yeah.
I just don't
It's
know
an
how you
interesting
can
critique.
reach that like close point of empathy and then turn around on it. I
Yeah, that's a kind of a hard bit to reconcile with. You know what? I'm gonna give it another read with that in mind because I think that's an important thing to
Because
consider.
and you know,
But it,
like it doesn't necessarily matter that he had that opinion. It just made me feel weird about it.
no, totally. Well, yeah, and especially like the reason I like it so much is more so the world it's built within,
Yeah,
which again, it's like my favorite kinds of stories are ones where it's like it's almost real life if you were to literally implant people with powers into it. Stories that feel like so drastically different from a, a, a somewhat rational reality
well,
start to feel
that's why
too
yeah,
just straight fiction. Yeah,
a lot of properties are too far in that camp, or like their world doesn't feel grounded within what's happened in the world. Where
totally.
like, and I think more of the stuff probably does it better now, like the Marvel movies and whatever. But like,
Hmm.
I remember a lot of the superhero movies kind of being like, yeah, this insane thing happened, this insane world changing event that's like bonkers, and whatever.
That was last week, so we're over it now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's totally that, and like I I don't want to be limiting in terms of like storytellers and fiction and that kind of a thing, but like I think it's super important in fiction to in some ways acknowledge the real world and like active struggles because storytelling is generally a tool to sort of reconcile with what we're all collectively experiencing. And sometimes it's just to, you know, to pull back and enjoy something. But I think
Right.
for more meaningful stories like that are really trying to make a larger statement about society or the world or, whatever.
Well, another thing is like I would say that, like, say, the general setting of Ward is more fantastical and just generally off the beaten
Yes. Oh
path and
yeah.
crazy, but it still feels very grounded within something that, like, I understand the world, I understand how things could happen, I understand, like, the possibility space, what the characters are going through. Like,
Right.
it doesn't have to be realistic, it just has to be mostly internally consistent and feel right.
Totally, exactly that. And like I imagine if I were to have read Ward like a monster without having consumed Worm first, it would it wouldn't feel that. Like I don't think I would have so comfortably settled into it. But they do something really, really I think is a smart thing in Ward, and Worm, of course. But they give us these very like mundane sort of real life instances that are sort of polluted by this world around them. So like a heavy thing in Ward is like, therapy. as a thing. Like that's a reoccurring deal, and I think that's a nice way to root a character into something that does start to feel real, um, even despite the very like the fantastical things happening around them or to them.
Yeah, and I mean it's like everything, like therapy to like the places
Going
they're eating
shopping. I
because
mean,
of
yeah,
or like where they shop because of like the circumstances of what's happening in the story, and like
right.
how they have to change their patterns, how like everybody has to like learn whatever. But anyway, so these books are great.
Yes,
Let's get
yes.
on to the audience participation because we've gone for 3 hours already. Um,
Oops, sorry, everybody.
I know everybody hates long streams. That's what everyone hates.
Everyone keeps saying it. That's been the chat blowing up for the last 2 hours,
End
saying,
the
"When are you guys gonna
stream, they
fucking
yell.
stop?"
Um, but let's see here. If anyone has an answer for the audience participation question, and this could even go out, I think that like um, a newbie to the chat like Hannah, who has not seen, who didn't hear the last week's episode, still might be able to think of something. It's not that one. The audience participation was Uber and Leet are video game themed supervillains. Choose a video game and describe what you think a heist themed after that game would be like. And I am going to put. I'm gonna say that Victoria's answer was bonkers. It was that she wanted the game Spiritfarer, and uh, oh yes, Greg's gonna put his answer on the Discord, so I'll read that out to the chat. Um, yeah, Spiritfarer is a game where you sort of help a group of people move from being like discontent spirits to the like fully being in the afterlife. Um, and Vic's very bizarre answer for what Uber and Leet would actually do to accomplish Spiritfarer is that they would basically kidnap people and make them live on a boat. And if they were closer to dying, that would be worth more points. So, couldn't tell ya. That's what Vic thinks is a good idea.
Yep, yep.
Um, and then David, do you want to discuss your?
Oh yeah. I kind of did this off the cuff last night, but my thinking on this was if you were to imagine the Spyro games where your goal is to like collect all these eggs with all these baby dragons and things like that. If I were Uber and Lee, I'd be just like heisting all of the eggs before they could be saved, and then naturally you would have yourself a proper what do you call it, human dragon trafficking situation, which feels probably pretty intense for Uber and Lee. I don't think they
That's
would
the
ever do
thing is
something.
like why I thought the Spiritfarer answer. Like I don't think they're really human trafficking level.
No, I don't think so either. I mean, dragon trafficking they might like stumble into, but then pretty quickly turn on it when they're like, well, we
Maybe
could
they
just
would
hang out with
steal
dragons.
like merchandise for some dragon-based video game.
Now
Like
that
like
would feel
it wouldn't be
appropriate.
Spyro. They'd be dressed as Spyro, but they'd be stealing eggs from like some
They
D
get
and
like
D,
Skyrim
like
dragons, like,
Skyrim dragon eggs or something.
all
Like it
right,
would be really because they're like real dumb. Let's be real. They're kind of dumb
they're
pieces of
dumb.
shit.
They're dumb, but I love them so much. They're so dumb.
Yeah.
Our big dumb sweet beautiful boys.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. They were mentioned. Yeah, in 2.1. That's perfectly correct. Let's see here. So Greg's answer is that Uber and Leet could do a wicked Dicey Dungeons heist. And in Dicey Dungeons, there's a lot of characters who are like literal, like they are a cubic person who runs around and fights. And you roll dice to fight with dice, and it's very dice. But
Very dice.
Leet could make all sorts of scare quotes equipment because that's what you fight with in the game. Uh, for them to swap out, and they'd have a big chunky dice costumes, and the target, Lady Luck, of course, incarnate
Ooh.
in the Ruby Dreams casino just outside of Brockton Bay. So that's a casino that we know because that's the one that Gru robbed with the Undersiders. Um, So yes, they would have had to preempt the Undersiders and make these dice costumes. Um, but they love costumes. They love doing heists. They even love
Mm-hmm.
being bad people.
Oh,
Um,
they love it. That's their shit.
yeah, absolutely. Um,
Oh,
and
yeah.
then let's see here. Okay, that's why I was confused about the prompts because I don't know the nuances of Uber and Leet's relationship. Yeah, I mean, Leet makes like gear and he is a tinker, but he is bad at being it. And then Uber is really, really good in like a fight or whatever because he can switch his like skill set and be really effective at like essentially anything. But like, like a
Mm-hmm.
martial art or whatever in a fight.
Right.
So.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, they have their moments, but overall the way they apply themselves is it's just so misguided most of the time.
Yeah, and then so 2 + 4 × 5 says for Spyro maybe they'd try to kidnap Lon.
Yeah, that'd be perfect. I think they'd be going after all these eggs, but then more realistically would want to try for the top dog, in which case they would get their shit stomped so hard.
Yeah, and then M says okay, that's what I was confused. Oh yeah, and then they sound like bumbling oafs, though. But if I was gonna put them in creatures, I feel like they would just try to do child labor with the Norns and make them steal money for them. I kind of thought the Norn thing might be another egg heist. I'm gonna be real, because you gotta hatch the Norns out of eggs, or like they would
See?
put on Norn costumes and try and steal honey, like the board game Honey Heist, where you're a bear.
Oh.
But like
Oh
those
yes.
those Norns need that honey. Um,
Need that honey.
um,
Need it.
anyway, I did not properly prepare a question for the next two chapters, but we're reading 2.5 and 2.6. Um, can you
Can
think of
I
anything
suggest something?
top of the
Yeah.
dome?
Well, I mean, I think tell me if this was already a previous one, but you asked me about what I think the most interesting drawback to a power would be. Um, I think that's a great question to field of like out of any power that you could theorize, what do you think would be the most devastating drawback?
Okay, yeah. Let's see here. So let's of any
Cookie
power
clicker.
you
Heist
can.
against a bakery.
Hell yeah,
uh, yeah, that would be fucking awesome.
that's good. 2 + 4 × 5. Of any power you can think of, um, what's the most interesting drawback?
Yeah, yeah. I thought that was a good question. I liked it.
Cool.
And I think you could expand that to in universe, out of universe, whatever you want.
Yeah, I'll put it up on the Discord a little later today. M says that's a good question. Yeah.
Hmm.
Okay. I'm just gonna read out the links. You can use Patreon to support Wildbow, the actual author of Worm, and at patreon.com/wildbow. And then the full text is available at parahumans.wordpress.com. The full fan-made audiobook can be found at audioworm.rain-online.org. And because that one's a bit complicated, I'm not even going to bother trying to tell you all the little fiddly bits. It's just these are in the stream description as well as the Discord on the links thing. And so next time we will be live streaming at the same time again, 1 p.m. Mountain, noon Pacific, and that's going to be Saturday, March 5th, with the chapters to read being 2.5 and 2.6.
Mm-hmm. And I'll just say, thank y'all for having me on here. This is very fun, and I'm excited to do some more of this in the future.
Yeah, I think this was pretty great. We're planning to have David on, kind of, I think about as frequently as Vic.
Yeah, yeah, I'm happy to do it.
She's gonna be on like the end of each arc, and then it seemed like you had wanted to do like, I mean, I'm happy for you to be here as often as you want. So
Oh hell yeah,
no,
yeah,
no,
yeah.
no
We
limits.
don't have to formalize it too much, but yeah, I think especially as we continue, there's there's so much I want to get into with all of this, and lots of great characters to explore. So yes,
Yes,
please.
and thank you everybody. Thank you M. Thank you Hannah. Thank you 2+4 x 5 for saying it was a good stream. Yeah, and M thanks David. I also thank David. You were great.
Thanks, thanks 2+4 x 5, aka 22.
I am also glad you found our channel. Pretty cool. David was your best guest. Well, I feel like the person saying this is pretty biased.
It's biased.
Yeah, exactly. So bye. Yeah, I gotta end the stream.
Bye.